He's down a piece, he's down 2 pawns.
A couple of checks, Magnus's king is going to dance easily out of them.
Take my queen and give me a new one, please.
He's losing now.
He walked right into the net.
And they know it. They know it.
Turn your boards.
909.
952.
Probably made a big mistake.
Oh, and the bar's going up. This is an absolute gem of a game.
Wesley so has done it.
He's going in for the attack, but
He's walked into checkmate. Black can play rook takes pawn.
One move checkmate. 2 seconds. Oh my god. What an Armageddon. We've had the plans, we've had the placements, and we have our 8 players for the Chessable Masters. Welcome, everyone. I'm International Master Denis Lazavik. Alongside me, my 2 good friends, Grandmaster Robert Hess and Grandmaster David Howell. Robert, David, I've missed you guys. We have a new year, a new season, a new format, and Robert, you have a new pink chair.
I certainly do, and I am jumping with excitement because, as you said, the play-ins, the placements, they were super exciting. But here we go. We have liftoff. It is the KO today.
Yeah, I've missed you guys, I've got to say. I've missed the players. It feels like just yesterday it was the Tour Finals out in Toronto 2023, but we're back, hopefully with a bang. I can't wait. I've been watching the last 2 days with so much excitement, and it feels like things are only going to build from this point on.
Time flies, David, and time will fly in this format as well because the players will be playing with just 10 minutes and a 2-second increment, but also just 4 regular events in this season of the Champions Chess Tour. Let's take a look at our tour schedule so you guys can mark your calendars. We've got the first event, the Chessable Masters. The second one starts on May 8th. The third one will be in July, and the final 4th qualifying event for the season and final will be in September. We will have our first finalist with the Chessable Masters, but Robert, it's not the only part to the season and final.
No, it certainly isn't, because the winners of each and every event, they move through to the final, but so do the other placers on the leaderboard. So if you don't win, you better perform well, because you can still earn your way through to the December finals.
Yeah, it might be early in this new 2024 season, but there's so much at stake. We saw it. A lot of the best players in the world already entering those play-ins. They're hungry. They want to score the maximum they can from every single event. So it's going to be a long season, a fun season, but plenty at stake already. And we're only just starting.
Yeah. It's going to be a fun season, and the fun has started, but the fireworks happen already as Magnus, Maxime, and Fedoseev will join the arena today. But 5 players had a hard-fought battle to make it to Division I of the Chessable Masters. And as Danya would say, damn girl, we had some big upsets.
It's day 2 of the Chessable Masters. The 2024 Champions Chess Tour is officially underway against Hikaru Nakamura. That rook on h6 is ugly AF.
No, that's it. Before. What a result. 2-0.
Yep.
And he's done it.
He sacrifices the rook. That is a heads-up play. Peter Svidler's Division I hopes come to an end. Is our first round of match play in the books. That's how you have it.
Wow. Somehow he was able to win, and he's about to checkmate Sam Sevian. Queenie won. He wins the match.
Claps his hands together. He gave a little bit of a dance there. Was that a little so stutter step, the so swing? I don't know what that was. If you play Queen f6, Bishop g7, all I need is a draw, bro. And there's the guy who continues to have an amazing Chessable Masters. Firouzja doesn't miss exchange sacks very often. He loves himself a good exchange sack, and we get the brilliant symbol.
Wow. Always a little nerve-wracking. Always a little nerve-wracking. Look at Anish. He's doing his best.
Denis Lazavik, the kid, sends home Hikaru Nakamura. Not home, sends him to D2. Anish Giri will join his fellow 2800 Club member. Are we looking at a future member of the 2800 Club? Denis Lazavik gets the job done, draws with black.
Denis the Menace strikes again. We saw a phenomenal performance by the 17-year-old in the last season when he made it to Toronto to the finals. And what a start he's had to season 2024. We're ready to kick off Division I, and let's take a look at our bracket. The dramatic matchups that are coming up between our 8 Division I players. We've got some heavyweights. We've got some surprise names. David, which matchup stands out to you?
Wow, they're all so juicy, Tanya. I can't wait to see how Denis Lazavik continues his run after scoring those upset wins yesterday over Nakamura and Giri. But my eyes are drawn slightly lower down the screen. Magnus Carlsen enters the fray, our world number one, and he faces off against Wesley. So a repeat of those Grand Tour finals, the season finale in 2023. Wesley So there did fall to defeat. Can he get his revenge? That's the big question.
A grudge match for Wesley. So this has become the El Clasico of the Champions Chess Tour. And once again, we see Magnus Carlsen take on Wesley in their very first matchup. But it's not just that. As you mentioned, David, we've also got Maxime taking on Denis Lazavik. And these two have a big storyline as well. But we're going to focus on our marquee matchup. Robert, we've seen Magnus take on Wesley so many times. But the last time they played each other, it was a Magnus Carlsen show.
It was indeed, because Magnus Carlsen triumphed on the very big stage of the CCT Finals in Toronto. So Magnus, he's always the favorite when he's in an event, head-to-head against Wesley. Big margins in Magnus's favor. So it's hard not to think that Magnus is ahead in this. However, Wesley, we know when he's at his best, he can even take down the world number one.
Yeah, and Magnus will start as the favourite, of course, but Wesley, he's scored 19 wins in Rapid. That's more than most people can dream of achieving against Magnus in their lifetimes. And Wesley has the added bonus of having warmed up over the last couple of days. Magnus, he's coming in to this event cold. He hasn't been involved in those play-ins, and I have a sneaky feeling that extra match practice might well favour Wesley. So we'll see. Everything up for grabs, of course, but this is the man to beat, Magnus Carlsen.
And we know one thing about Magnus, very often he tends to start slow in these tournaments and then picks up the pace. He becomes unbeatable at some point, but right now it is the first day that Magnus gets on the board, gets into action. Can Wesley strike early on? It is going to be his big chance to get that grudge victory in. A big day coming up for these two in the winners' quarterfinals. Robert, what are the big takeaways for Wesley to make sure that we don't have a repeat storyline from Toronto?
I like what David just said, that Wesley is warmed up. That practice certainly helps, because it's not like he's playing anyone out there. He is playing world-class grandmasters. He earned his spot to today's action. So I do think that Wesley, he needs to forget that it's Magnus Carlsen. History may not repeat itself, and the history that Wesley does want to repeat is that Fischer Random World Championship match where Wesley didn't just beat Magnus, he destroyed him.
Absolutely. And that's not the only big fight. We've got 4 matches. And the other one that we're all very excited about is Denis Lazavik taking on the Frenchman, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Now, these two also played against each other in the Toronto finals. It was the one big match victory for the young Denis Lazavik. And what a performance that was, taking it in the Armageddon against Maxime. And we see their scoreline here with 2 draws. These were the draws that happened in Toronto in their Rapid. And then finally, Denis getting the dub done in the Armageddon. Is that going to be the match strategy for Denis today as well, David?
Quite possibly. I think he wouldn't be averse to taking this to Armageddon, a one-off kind of shootout for the victory. But Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, I don't think he wants to let it go that far. It's been a while now since the top players stopped underestimating Denis. Denis is just a great player. They all know that. So Maxime will need to bring his A game. I think he might try to hit Denis in the opening, where still, compared to the slightly older players, more predictable. But this one is anyone's game. I think it's a real 50-50.
Denis Lazavik is the Super GM Slayer. Just to get to the Division I winners bracket, he beat Hikaru Nakamura, and not just that, he took down Anish Giri right after. So Denis Lazavik, he has what it takes. Absolute monster, just 17 years old.
It's not about the size of the dog in the fight. It's about the size of the fight in the dog. And Denis Lazavik has made it clear he's not going to get bullied. He's going to bring on the fight. He's already relegated Hikaru Nakamura and Anish Giri. Can he do the same against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave today? Let's take a look at the format of our Division I knockout stages. It is a double elimination bracket. It's fast and furious, as the time control is just 10 minutes with a 2-second increment with every move. 2.5 points gets you the match victory. In case of a tie, we will have the bidding Armageddon. The loser goes down to the loser's bracket. The winner continues to stay on the top in the winner's bracket. And the big thing to remember in this season for all of us is 4 events. We will have 8 players to make it to the finals. The 4 winners from the 4 events and from the tour standings. The time format change, as we saw, with 10 minutes and a 2-second increment. And for all the other details about the changes in this year's Champions Chess Tour, we've got Danny breaking it down for us.
Every Champions Chess Tour event kicks off with a play-in tournament, followed by match play on the second day to determine placement across Divisions 1, 2, and 3. The remaining players then compete in these 3 divisions across 6 days of grueling yet thrilling double elimination knockout chess. All players are battling to earn their chunk of the $300,000 prize fund and tour leaderboard points. But the biggest prize is a spot directly to the live finals at the end of the year. Only the winner of Division 1 will claim that honor. In addition, they and the runner-up both secure re-entry to the top division our next time around. The winner of Division 2 also secures a spot in Division 1, while the winner of Division 3 is guaranteed at least a seat in Division 2 and may even advance to Division 1 through match play. 8 days, 3 divisions, 1 golden ticket to the Champions Chess Tour Live Finals. This is the Chessable Masters.
The first golden ticket is up for grabs in this one, and the fight starts in just a couple of minutes. You got 4 juicy matchups, and one of the players who also made it to Division 1, Alireza Firouzja. Now, he had a disappointing Toronto finals. He's definitely looking for a better performance this year in the Champions Chess Tour. What are we expecting from Alireza, and what did you make of his performance in the placements?
Yeah, I've got to say, Alireza, I was quite impressed throughout the placements. It felt like, okay, he's not quite in top form. He's moving through the gears, but he was always there or thereabouts. And when the chips were down, when it mattered, he made his mark. And that's been the story of the last 12 months for Alireza. Up and down his year, his rating. In Tata Steel, it was up and down. Lots of wins, but lots of losses as well. So it's entertaining for us. We're loving it as commentators. But he'll want a calmer progression, of course, through these knockout rounds. I want to see Alireza on his A game.
Happy days for Alireza, because yesterday he defeated Vladislav Artemiev, and we know how dangerous Artemiev can be, and so can his opponent, Vladimir Fedoseev. I don't think that anyone wants to face the big fish, because he's taken down the likes of the very best players on the planet. This is a pretty epic clash.
The big fish in Division 1. Sorry, David.
I'm just loving those fashionable and victorious big fish in a big pond. These players, just loving those nicknames. And I wanted to ask you guys, we now know the eight finalists, I'm going to say, in Division 1. Who in Division 1 do you think is going to take that golden ticket? Putting you on the spot.
Tommy, I'm waiting for you.
Gosh, it's hard to bet against this guy called Magnus Carlsen, you know? I mean, I don't know if you guys have heard about him, if you know him. I mean, he is he won 3 events in Champions Chess Tour 2023. He's the 3-time and the reigning tour champion. He is the world #1. He's always eating on camera. It always looks like he's just woken up. His hair is all over the place, but his chess, oh my God, always on point.
It certainly is. And look at Magnus right now. As you said it does seem like he may have just woken up. He's wearing a pretty fashionable shirt. And we'll see if his chess is up to par with how he has played in the past. Because I think David's point from earlier is a very good one. That even for Magnus, he can be a bit slow to wake up on the chessboard. It sometimes takes a few games to get your feet beneath you. So for Magnus, you don't have the luxury of time when you're playing Wesley So. Because if Wesley can win the first game, it's really hard to beat that guy. He is one of the most solid players on the planet.
Yeah, and I do know that Magnus has more tournaments lined up. His next tournament is Fischer Random Freestyle Chess. I know he's been focusing on that a lot, so this might be the time to strike him when his attention has strayed, perhaps when he's not quite warmed up yet. And yeah, of course, Magnus, he's going to be the favourite. Good choice, Tanya. But I think we might see a surprise, at least on this first day.
Well, when you play Super Grandmasters, you better be warmed up. And we were mentioning how Denis Lazavik, he beat Hikaru and Anish yesterday just to make it to Division I. Look at how underrated this kid is. I call him Dennis the Menace, and for good reason, because his rating may be 2550, at least on paper. But look at these results on a world-class stage in the World Rapid in 2022, 2667 performance. Then the World Blitz right after that, 2764. In the 2023 World Rapid, 2621. The 2023 World Blitz, 2693. He is performing over 2700 in the quickest of time patrols. And of course, in the CCT Finals in Toronto, he didn't make it through, but he beat Maxime Vachier-Lagrave head-to-head, still performed about 2650. So it is very clear that his ratings should be thrown out the window because he is always overperforming. His ratings have not caught up to his strength.
You relegate Hikaru Nakamura, you relegate Anish Giri, everyone's taking you seriously in this event. Denis Lazavik was so impressive in last season, and we often spoke about his style of play, which is so different from his colleagues and his contemporaries, from the young under-20 generation right now. We see him play these strategic positions. We see him fight it out, duel it out in these long endgames. He manages to hold against the very best. When he gets that opportunity, he strikes in it. He has that patience, and that's what makes him so different. David, what do you think is the reason we see him go in the long run against the very best in the world? Is it the style of play that we've been talking about?
Yeah, Denis Lazavicius. He's got this confidence that's kind of belies his young age. He really kind of believes in his ability to handle these end games, these long grinds, and his opening repertoire is so finely honed. Everything you need in rapid chess, in speed chess, Denis Lazavik has it. Nerves of steel, fantastic openings, and that confidence to pounce when even the best players in the world are facing him. Any small mistake, he's ready to strike. So the only question is whether Denis will be Lazar victorious in his in his clash today. But in the meantime, we see Wesley So getting ready for that match against Magnus Carlsen. So many games, and we'll try to follow them all.
And I think Wesley So is walking around right now in his playing room, trying to figure out where to put that second fair play camera. We saw him moving around with his laptop, and there he is, still confused about how to make the logistics work. I have to say, I was following the placement action, and Wesley's situation with the two chairs, his laptop on one of the chairs, it was surprising to say the least, but it did not affect his chess at all.
Well, part of the fair play monitoring is showing that there's no one else in your room, that everything is under control. And when we had Wesley So on camera there, I saw in the background he had like a rook and a knight on his shelf, and there's Wesley. He's got a blanket. He's not just warmed up from yesterday's action, but he is warm and ready because he's under the comfort of that security blanket. So for Wesley So, he looks like he's ready to play. But as we saw behind him, there's a knight, there's a rook, and maybe he's the king after all.
Wesley looks warm. He needs to get the hot chess going against Magnus Carlsen. You mentioned that he looks secure in that blanket. Magnus mentioned a really interesting thing, David, after that victory in Toronto, that he sort of plays against Wesley's style, sort of the lack of aggression in Wesley. And is Wesley bobbing to some music, some tunes there?
Yeah,
Are we going to see more aggression?
Wesley had something in his ears. Maybe it doesn't sound like the most aggressive of music, the most upbeat tunes there. It looks like a calm, slow melody. He looks very chilled, so chilled, Wesley So there. But in the meantime, I agree. He has to be aggressive on the chessboard. He has to kind of not back down, not let Magnus dictate the pace, the nature, the style of the game, not let Magnus bully him psychologically, which... we've seen so many times from the world number one. Magnus lives rent-free in most of our heads. He just has to ensure, Wesley, that doesn't happen today. But we're almost at game time. We're almost off. We're awaiting the first moves. Magnus starts with white. Any predictions with the opening before it's too late? Oh, it looks like the Reti. He got there first.
Yeah, we didn't have a chance to put in our guesses, but I think Magnus, the lights are out, at least over his face. So he needs to work on that camera angle, but hopefully the lights are on upstairs in his head. Oh, and there we go. He takes that drink of water. And what do you make of the opening, Tanya, where Magnus, he hasn't decided to create tension in the center, at least not yet. Do you like this sort of cagey start from him?
Well, we see him do this quite often, but against Wesley, it's usually been the start with the king spawn opening or the queen spawn opening. At least that's what we saw traditionally in the Champions Chess Tour. So a new approach, but with Wesley's speed that he's responded with, he doesn't look, or at least he's not acting to be too surprised with this. And now it's the big decision. How does Wesley keep the tension in the center here, Robert?
Well, he decides instead of to keep the tension, he is trying to avoid it for now. And David, Magnus strikes with b4, so he is trying to chisel at Black's pawn chain, and it is a pawn sacrifice. What do you make of this mini gambit?
Yeah, I've got to say I like it, but I also hate it. Firstly, you're a pawn down, so not my cup of tea, not the kind of favorite approach by many top players these days. You don't want to be too kind of materialistic in general, but here Magnus, his idea was to open up as many lines as possible, and Robert, you mentioned it's kind of a flank gambit. It's basically a reversed version of the Benko gambit, as we call it, but Wesley has said no, he bypassed this pawn. If Wesley earlier had captured on the a3 square, then White's rook would have opened up on the a file. There would have been open lines here for the White rook. White's bishop would have come out. So interesting that Wesley could have been a pawn up. He is temporarily, but this pawn will soon fall. And I don't know, have either of you two got experience in the Benko gambit? I must say, not my area of expertise.
No.
I've actually played this position with the white pieces where White pushes the b5 pawn from b5 to b6 and gives that pawn back. But again, to me, this feels like a cagey approach from Wesley trying to keep things secure, like his blanket that he's got on right now. But then again, this is the kind of stuff that can backfire against Magnus. Robert, does this surprise you that Wesley decided not to capture that a3 pawn?
Well, this entire opening has surprised me, and even Magnus's last move, pushing his pawn to a4 rather than recapturing on b3. Both sides are trying to lay claim to important space and squares. The b4 square for Black is now firmly under control. And then for White, you have this light square diagonal. The bishop on g2 is unopposed on that diagonal. And so we could see that bishop shining its powers across the board. I don't know whose position I'd rather have. It's a new position to my eyes, but it feels like one where both players are on their own.
Yeah, it feels like both players have trump cards up their sleeve. You mentioned the b4 square. White's knight also has access to a beautiful outpost on b5 a bit later. First, Magnus wins the pawn back. And Tanya, from your experience, you mentioned you've kind of played this opening just with reverse colors. Do you think Magnus is going to be happy? Here, he's basically played an opening you usually see with Black, but he's White, so he's got an extra tempo. Should he be happy about that?
And it's always tricky to kind of adjust yourself to these reversed colors opening. One of the ideas as White that I like in this, and that would mean a position that Black has currently for Wesley, is to actually transfer that knight from f6 to the c5 square. We've been talking about how important these squares are. So there's often this plan of the knight falling back and then finding itself on c5, which is a nice square. I think Magnus, he was perhaps expecting a more dynamic approach by Wesley to capture that a3 pawn, to pick up that free pawn, which gives a lot of activity to White. And now he has to fight in this position. I like these positions, well, in this case for White, for Black here, simply because that knight from f6 will land on the square of c5, which is a nice square. And I'm getting confused as a commentator with reverse colors. I have no idea how the players are handling it.
And I actually found that funny because I'm doing the same thing in my head because it is a Benko gambit colors reverse. And we saw for a quick moment this bishop b4 move from Wesley, perhaps the most natural move, developing your piece, getting ready to castle, putting on defended square. The engine didn't really approve it, and I think it's precisely because of what Magnus is doing. He can challenge this bishop immediately, and if White takes on b4, next move, then knight on c6 could not capture back, which is why Wesley right now brings his knight back to d7. That way the e5 pawn is well protected, and if the capture on b4 happens, he can successfully take back with a knight rather than doubling his pawns, which you may want to do in some positions, but here I'm not so sure.
Yeah, it feels like this is the two players just tiptoeing around each other. Magnus makes that decision. He trades off the bishops. And it's just a fight for squares. It's about maneuvering. And I've got to say, it feels like traditionally this would favor Magnus Carlsen. He's so good strategically, so good at kind of sensing where the important squares are, when to switch up the pace, the quickness of the game. But Wesley, he's done nothing wrong. And Evaluation Bar slightly preferring Black. I've got to agree. Just we're kind of playing by association with colors reversed. Yes, Wesley's a tempo down on a known opening, but he's got everything covered. Tanya, your dream square on c5. that knight's going to be beautiful on this square. It feels like Magnus is taking some big risks early on in this game, and evaluation bar continuing to drop after Magnus's retreat there. The white knight wants to come around and snack on this pawn, but he's not going to get time, surely, Magnus. Tanya, are you agreeing? To my eyes, it looks fantastic for black.
Yeah, everything that you pointed out. And I also really like that Wesley captured on b4 with that pawn on a5. At first, it looks like you're spoiling your pawn structure. You're doubling up, but you're taking away some key squares from that knight on b1. Well, now the positions change. White had to spend some time picking up that pawn on b4, and we see the queens are going to get traded off because the a4 pawn is really weak. And just coming back to Robert's point earlier about this being a reversed Benko gambit and extra tempo that matters. I think Wesley's approach to go with the move b4 to b3 early on in the game, to not go for the picking up of the pawn, in these kind of positions, perhaps the extra tempo doesn't matter as much.
It doesn't, and it's because it's a relatively closed position, so I'm with you, Tanya. And Wesley just quickly played queen to a5. He released the tension. I think he's going into this game with the mantra, I'm going to try to draw with the black pieces and then press with white, because he could have kept his b4 pawn. I actually think that keeping more pieces on the board was favorable for black because white's pieces were stepping on each other's toes somewhat. Now after the queen trade, mass liquidation on the a file, the a4 pawn is dropping. I don't think that black is any worse at the moment, that's for sure, but I don't know if there's so many winning chances left because there aren't that many pieces remaining.
Ooh, and some of these moves in the game review here not proved of by the computer. This was a missed opportunity for Wesley, so to my eyes, it looks like a very natural move. He's trying to gain time now against this white rook. Actually, if the queens disappear, I wouldn't be surprised, for example, on the next move, if the black king just shifts to d7, swings the other rook across, and if the queens are off the board, black's pieces are so actively placed. Wesley, so, at least to my eyes, turning things in his favour. I think Magnus really needs to kind of pull the brake, shift gears here, and try to make that draw. Wesley, on the camera, smiling as well. He looks thrilled with his position, and rightly so. I wish we could see how Magnus is feeling. That dark shadow. There we go. Brightening up suddenly, but I don't think his mood is feeling very bright with this position here. After the queen's leaving the board now, it's all about how active black's pieces are. Like Robert said earlier, this pawn is doomed. Sooner or later, Wesley can kind of take it at his leisure, and nothing at all to worry about here for black. It's just about whether he can try to turn it into an advantage even at some point.
And now the big question is, David, has Wesley Red grind like a grandmaster? Because it looks like it might be time to start thinking about that. And endgame, you got piece activity. The a4 pawn is about to fall. Black's king in the center is actually ideally placed because you don't even need to go shut castle anymore. You could go with your king to d7 as Wesley does it, bring the other rook into play. I'm loving Wesley's position right now.
I love the way Wesley's handling this because that pawn on a4 is not going anywhere. It cannot legally move, and it cannot be defended very easily. So black wants to set up the second rook over to a8 to keep control of this open file, or put a rook on b8 and then slam it down on b2. So that's why Magnus, realizing he doesn't have all the time in the world to just sit and see this rook get active, he decides to strike in the center with pawn to f4. And if the black pawn e5 is removed, d4 is loose. So these are some difficult decisions for Wesley. He might just push his pawn to f6 to keep a nice pawn chain, everything defended. But you see Wesley investing some time right now because there may be tactics with that black king on d7. It's still in the center of the board. There's still rooks on the position here. So I think Wesley, he's just trying to be accurate. What Magnus shook his head. He's not happy. Black is certainly no worse.
As you predict, Robert, there, black does play pawn to f6. We see a quick trade, and Magnus activates his knight. This game looks like it's roughly in the balance, but perhaps Magnus here needing to be slightly more careful than Wesley, just to maintain that kind of equal position. Maybe it's time to jump over to check out another game. We'll update everyone, of course, on these developments. I want to check out the other game we've been talking about a lot, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave against Denis Lazavik. And we jump in at a moment where, again, a small cross, a missed opportunity for black. Natural to me. Level material in this one. Robert, what are your first instincts about this position? How should we evaluate it?
Well, we come in and there's immediately a miss, right? Giving an X. And normally you would say that the black's position looks quite solid to my eyes. The bishop on b2 for white it's not playing. The knight on h4, where is it going? So perhaps black had something a little bit stronger, but the position looks very sturdy from Denis Lazavik's perspective. I think he's handled this opening perfectly. He is not worse in the slightest, and I don't know where white even hopes to build an advantage from.
Tanya, are you kind of favoring either side here? It looks like maybe Denis has escaped the opening in good shape here.
I think both the games that we've checked out, black is doing great. In this one, Denis, in the earlier one, Wesley, they've gotten out of the opening without too much trouble. This one is so symmetrical, the pawn structure, the minor piece balance, everything, no such weaknesses. That last move by Denis, c6, taking control of the central d5 square, making sure that white doesn't have any jumps with that knight on d5 anymore. So Maxime decides to improve the position of that other knight that you were pointing out, knight coming back to f3, but I'm still not seeing how white actually makes progress. You can't really push the c pawn because the b4 pawn will be hanging there. So the b2 bishop still struggles to come into the game. I agree with both of you that for Denis, this has been a good start.
Great start for Denis Lazavik. And this one, it does feel like the calm before the storm. Long way to go. We look at the clock times with our new time control this season. Both players still with plenty of time left and 2-second increment to boot. Max slightly ahead on the clock there. But I think we should go back to that marquee game, to Magnus Carlsen against Wesley So, because that one feels like it's racing towards a conclusion. And yeah, we're deep into the endgame now. He's got a set of rooks off the board, but visually it looks so attractive, my eyes at least, for black. Black's king more active in the center than white's. It can choose which direction to go later. Black's bishop keeping the white king feeling a bit uncomfortable for now, and at the right moment you still can take it enough. Robert, do you think Magnus here, has he kind of survived the worst, or can Wesley continue to be ambitious? He jumps in with a knight.
Wow, and he forced that rook to a... Whoa, what's he pre-moving? Knight to c1. I mean, if the rook went to a2, knight c1 would have picked up the e2 pawn, but Wesley trying to get that one anyway. And look at this, an exclamation point given to bishop to g4. He's trying to provoke this e-pawn to push because a pawn chain is only as strong as its base pawn. And so the e2, d3, c4 pawn chain look nice and steady, everything well defended. But if you have to push up to e3, then that pawn on d3 becomes a target. Bishop d1 becomes available. And then knight on c2 is in some trouble. The a4 pawn remains loose. So white's pieces are awkwardly placed. I actually, at first was like, what's Wesley doing? Pre-moving. But he's that strong at even bullet chess that he understands the position, and the dynamics seem to be favoring black.
Oh, look at this. Magnus just ignores the threat. What's his idea? This pawn is simply falling. And Wesley gobbles it up. He's trying to undermine the black knight now, but Wesley, he's destroyed that pawn chain you were talking about, Robert. This is a piece sacrifice. He's given up his knight, and I'm assuming it's going to be captured. What else? And then black will take the a4 pawn, and he's going to bank on these two connected passes in the center to just race down the board. Is this genius? Is this Magnus? Magnus, I was going to say. And, or was it a bit of both? Wesley to try and win this game.
I love it. I love this approach by Wesley. Magnus said his strategy against Wesley is about hustling him, hustling Wesley's lack of aggression. We've seen none of that. Wesley's going all out. He delays the picking up of the a pawn. He first picks up the central pawns, and now he's sacrificed an entire piece. But we've got to do a deep dive into this position because for the moment, Wesley's down a knight in the position. You're pointing out the e-pawn, also the black rook jumping onto that second rank with a ton of pinning ideas with rook a2 coming up. How much trouble is this? I see the eval bar says it's still even, but from a practical perspective, is Magnus feeling the heat right now?
I think he is. I mean, this position looks uncomfortable for white because the knight on c2 is already threatened by the bishop. As you mentioned, Tanya, rook a2 becomes an immediate threat. And let's say you want to jump your knights forward somewhere. Knight f3 is met by the simple king to d6, improving the location of the black king because you're defending your loose pawn. The king is active, used as a weapon in the endgame. So I'm looking at this position, and Magnus needs to be very careful here because if he makes a single mistake, it's no longer a balanced game. It's completely in Wesley's favor.
Guys, I want to make you guess the best move. I took a peek because I thought white's position is so ugly here, so unattractive. How does Magnus hold this together? What do you think white's best move is here? It's unfindable for a human. That's a big clue.
I'm gonna just by.
I'm gonna go with king e1.
Yeah, I was going to actually say knight a1 because the way you asked the question is so leading, and it's not a natural move at all. But if anyone on this planet could find it, I think it's Magnus Carlsen.
Wow. Look at him shifting in his chair there, Magnus, leaning forward. He knows this is a key position. I was attracted to your king e1 there, Tanya, as well. I think a very logical move, but in the end, after a move like pawn to c5, white's knights are just stuck, pretty much zugzwanged. But knight to a1 is the best move according to the computer. The idea is to loop around this knight to rotate it round to b3. And the knights, superfluous knights we sometimes call them, but they cling on to each other. For example, if the black rook drops down, knight to b3, and for now, you're holding. But this is so hard to evaluate. I mean, to my eyes, it looks like black plays Robert's move, king d6. The pawns are rolling, running. But after king to f3, you have a semi-blockade on some important squares, and the knight's surviving. But Magnus needs to find this move, and I think it's almost impossible. Knight to a1. He plays knight to f3 instead. And now Robert's move, king d6, looks like it gives black a big advantage. Black moving forward, in control. Question mark given to that move. We can't fault it. Very human, knight f3, especially in rapid chess. Who's going to look at a move like knight a1? And Magnus gives his piece back. This is going to be one-way traffic now. Level material yet again, but at the right moment, you can take this pawn. Not yet, because there might be some knight forks, some knight checks. So maybe Wesley takes some time out to guard against that. But feels like Magnus in big, big trouble in game one today.
Well, Tanya, I was about to ask you that Magnus up a piece for 2 pawns, but those pawns were running up the board, restricting white's pieces. Do you think this is a good practical try for Magnus? Because at least what he could envision for a draw, blockade on the dark squares, trying to take away some of these remaining black pawns. Do you think the draw seems more within reach now?
I think knight a1, the move that you were discussing, and Robert, that you pointed out, is so difficult to play and to even find. It's not even on your radar. A retreating move all the way back to a1. You're not sure how you're coming out of the fix that you're in. So you really want to try and simplify the position. I think you're on point. Magnus just wants to get out of this game. He wants to find the fastest way to neutralize. But this might not be neutralizing at all, because a bishop versus knight in these endgames is good news for black. You can try and push. You have to watch out for that knight on g7 getting trapped. Bishop to f7, it comes back. How are you retreating with the knight? If the minor pieces get traded off, this is winning for black. Are you going g4, king f5? A knight f5, I'm sorry?
Process of elimination, you have to play g4. This is the only route back for the white knight, but Wesley has cut off this square. f5 now taken away from the white knight, and a big threat. The knight's still trapped. Like you say, Tanya, if there's a trade, knight for bishop, black will win due to this distraction, the outside pass pawn. So Magnus now needs to keep his knight alive. Is it the move g5 just to stop the threat? But this is still incredibly ugly. You're playing without a piece, and black's pawn looks like it's racing down the board. He plays it, again, process of elimination, but is he going to save this game? Exclamation mark. Only move there from Magnus. He's surviving by the skin of his teeth. Robert, do you see any resources? Can black continue pushing?
Well, what white now wants to do is play h4, h5, and g6. Just get rid of that h7 pawn. Because if that pawn is no longer on the board, then the white pieces will go march on over to the c pawn, either blockade it or sacrifice the knight for that last pawn. A lone king and bishop cannot deliver checkmate, for those of you who are newer in the audience. So that is what white is aiming for. Get all of black's pawns off the board, even if you have to sacrifice your knight in the process. A great move, g5. h4 comes next. The black king kind of has to stay put, because as it goes up to f4, knight can now slide back to e6 with check, and the knight is safe.
Yeah, Magnus should be saving this game now that the white knight escapes that dungeon on g7. Let's take a zoom out of this one very briefly, just to check in on the other action. Magnus does play the best move, gets his knight out of dodge there. And this is the bird's eye view. We see the evaluation bars mostly roughly around the center. Vachier-Lagrave against Lazavik has been level since we left it. Not much to report there, apart from maybe Lazavik's knight on the top left of your screens, in the top left corner as well. The other games, Nepomniachtchi on the back foot against man of the moment, Jose Martinez. Magnus should draw now against Wesley So, and Fedoseev against Firouzja, also roughly balanced. What catches your eye here, Robert, from the other games?
I think that Jose Martinez game with the black pieces against two-time world championship challenger Jan Nepomniachtchi, because Jose celebrated his birthday a couple days ago when he won came in first place in the play-in. Then he was able to sail through the placement, and now here he is in Division 1. So the recent birthday boy. Look at that last move, by the way. G5, allowing a fork with check on F6, but you sometimes need to protect your king by getting active on the side that you're being attacked, because now that pawn on G5 is well defended by another pawn on H6, its best friend, whereas the pawn on G7, that was well within White's attacking range, and queen takes H6 was on the docket. So I love moves like this, and I love the way that Jose plays chess, even though he's down to 22 seconds remaining.
This is super complex, and Jaspam, his birthday week seems like it's continuing, and Jan Nepomniachtchi doesn't go to pick up that exchange on E8 because that knight on H5, it's such a key piece for White. Jan, it's very important for him to try to create the initiative. He's down an exchange currently, but practically still a lot of chances with Black's king being so weak and just 20 seconds to defend this position.
It feels like it's all about the clock. I'm used to seeing Jose here just hustle his opponents. Whenever I play him on Chess.com, he's always flagging me. He's so quick, so instinctive. But yeah, Nepomniachtchi has to use this clock situation against Black now. I'm not sure whether you jump in with your knight and kind of, again, hint that you might go for this rook, which is almost trapped, or do you at some point push a pawn forward, try to break this kind of stronghold on G5 with your pawns. But the white rook as well, lacking squares. This is not easy. White's queen, super passive. This is why White's attack is not that dangerous. And evaluation bar, I think, to be trusted in this type of position. It's so wild, it's so chaotic. Sometimes we say don't trust the bar. It's a very human position, but it feels like Jose has ridden the storm. And wow, pawn to H4. I was reluctant to suggest it immediately, maybe a bit later, because suddenly this rook lacking squares, and instead he jumps in with the black knight.
Oh,
wow, Jose.
What a move! Yeah, he's defending by attacking. He's just trying to remove all of White's most aggressive pieces. If the knights come off the board, the rook takes on D4. So look at, whoa, Yago's knight takes G5, and Jose jumps in with his knight because the D2 bishop is loose and the queen on C1 is under attack.
Everything's hanging for White. Which piece do you save? There's 3 up for grabs next move. You've got to check, but the black king can simply run. You could also take this knight.
G5? I'm just looking at all the checks, David. You're pointing out the king running. E7 is the only square. Is bishop G5 something that you can start looking at already?
I think you have to, Tanya. I think you're completely right. This bishop's dropping anyway. You might as well sell it for a high price. You can get a check, and he goes for the check. You get your queen out of the way as well. But black is a rook up. Black has a whole extra rook. Yes, the white knights can fork and win back some material, but the black king, if it gets over to B8, this is game over. Black has too much material, 2 more moves. And Jose Martinez is going to get this victory. 12 seconds. What do you think, Robert? Is this going to be enough?
I think that Jospin has the clear edge. That's what Jose is known as, his username. And it's the Petrosian King March. And look at that. Rook takes knight on E8. Apparently wasn't the best move. It's impossible not to play that. When someone takes your piece, you want to capture back. And I think the one thing keeping White potentially in this game is that H4 pawn. It's not a shield for the White King. It's a passer that you want to push. Wow.
Wow. He's so good. Double exclamation mark, that last move. Dropping a bomb on the position. Queen to G1. Check will lead to checkmate. It's that famous combo, the queen and knight teaming up. At this point, it's pretty much against the lone king. And, ooh, it's the Petrosian King March you mentioned, Robert. This time it's the white king that's running up the board. Both kings have been doing a bit of dancing here, but the white king is doomed. No way to escape. If you step forward to F5, there's going to be a deadly check on F3. And white has to lose even more material. Jan Nepomniachtchi smiles, and he's about to resign.
It's almost game over, and he does it, and Jasper reacts. He gets the dub. He wins the first game against Jan Nepomniachtchi. The birthday gifts keep coming.
Oh, wow. Yes, and wow, what a game that was. Knight D4 checkmate with so many pieces smothering the white king. So what a final touch from Jospin, from Jose Martinez, and you saw how much it meant to him. David, he gave us that fist pump in celebration.
Yeah, and there's action happening elsewhere. There was a draw in the meantime between Wesley So and Magnus Carlsen. There's a deep endgame between Lazavik and Vachier-Lagrave, but this one's still going, and 4 seconds on the clock for Firouzja, exclamation mark. But he's battling pawns. Both sides have pawns running down the board. This black A2 pawn close to touchdown, and white's pawns soon running. But Robert, help me out. Whose position is favorable here? Evaluation bar says level, but this one surely is anyone's game.
Oh, look at that, how quickly the tables turn, but bishop e6 giving a check, apparently not the right follow-up. So for both these players, it's good that they don't know the evaluation, as this position is anyone's game. It's extremely messy.
Oh, it's messy, but now the black rook has infiltrated. This was so cunning from Firouzja. With only a few seconds left, this bishop's trapped, and black is on the brink of making a new queen. Black luckily can give up his own bishop to stop white's f-pawn. If the white pawn ever pushes, it's simply going to be eliminated. Feels like black suddenly now, out of nowhere, ahead in the race. White's king got active, but in the end walks into a dead end. And here we go. This whole variation is playing out. It's all about the black a pawn and Firouzja shutting the door. White's pawn dropping. No more counterplay. Tanya, what do you think? Is this just going to be over now?
Yeah, I think it's quite beautifully played, the last couple of moves by Alireza Firouzja. Now there's nothing to be done. As you pointed out, the e-pawn isn't moving forward anymore, and it's going to be the a-pawn that will decide the game. Looks like Alireza is about to take the first win, and meanwhile, Wesley Magnus Carlsen did end in a draw.
Yeah, and that game was a draw. This one looks like it's great for black, but I can see... Oh, he drops the a-pawn right away. No time for Firouzja. He saw knight c2 coming, and now it should be a hold with best play, but shoulda, woulda, coulda. This is now speed chess, and by the way, rook and bishop versus rook, theoretically drawn, everybody, but really hard to save when you have no time.
Yeah, Alireza with 7 seconds on the clock now.
White needs to give up the knight for this black pawn and try to hope to defend that. But this is going to be a long fight ahead. No certainty here. And Firouzja, he knows he was winning, so it might be a bit of frustration in him. White can now give a check, for example, with the white rook. But no. Okay, the pawn's marching. The white knight is a bit offside, and the bar disappears. This check, and white's pieces are just too far away. They're not going to stop this black pawn from racing down the board. It's going to sprint towards touchdown on c1. Fedoseev, he just rushed a bit too much. 25 seconds. He didn't coordinate his pieces, and look how the bishop totally dominates this knight. The bishop on this diagonal just cutting across the white knight's retreats. And, well, see a result now. He surely isn't going to let this one slip, Alireza Firouzja.
You've been talking about the defensive technique of sacrificing that knight for the c3 pawn. That knight isn't going to get to the c3 pawn.
No, it's because Alireza understood the assignment. He knew what white was going for, and he said, I'm not going to allow it. And now the king can just march forward, help that pawn, escort it to the other side, and then knight on d7. It needs to be back in white's territory. It's way too far away. Knight's being slow-moving pieces, not helping.
Oh, and he's going to use the bishop as a blockader. The black bishop's going to come in to help the pawn promote on c1. Or the bishop's going to help block some checks. And there we go. Bishop to f2 shuts the door in Fedoseev's face, and black makes a new queen. It's a matter of time now. It looks like they've swapped sides. Black's pieces are starting on the white's starting row. But a check, double attack, game over. Firouzja takes the win, the first game of the day.
Alireza Firouzja converts, but he was winning earlier on. He messed it up. Fedoseev had his chance, but in the end manages to get Fedoseev's knight out of the game. A brilliant conversion there. David, that means we have finished our round one games. Some interesting results there. Robert, what surprised you the most about this one?
Well, the players winning with the black pieces. That's not something that we can say all the time, although in Tata Steel and the classical chess, it seemed like in the opening rounds, that was the norm. But for Jose Martinez and their Alireza Firouzja, huge wins with the black pieces.
And there we have our game one from the winners quarterfinals. It is a best of 4, 2.5 points takes the match. And it is Jose Martinez and Alireza Firouzja who take the lead in their match. The other two matches start with a draw. Denis Lazavik with a confident hold against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Wesley So in driver's seat with the black pieces. And another confident hold against Magnus Carlsen, who was on the defense but got the job done.
What a first round to start the day. Magnus living life on the edge, surviving by the skin of his teeth, and those two black wins, definitely the highlights. Firouzja, it was in the balance for so long, but he turned on the magic when it was necessary, deep in the endgame. But Martinez, I've got to say, Robert, just looks like the man in form right now in this rapid format. In 10 minutes on the clock, for him, it's plenty. He's just crushing the best players in the world.
Well, for Jose, he doesn't get to play that much over-the-board chess, but he thrives online. He plays in every single Title Tuesday. He's a streamer, a content creator, and somebody who lives for the moment, and he lives for that time pressure because he's always with minimal time on his clock. Those few seconds, that's when he actually brings out his best.
I mean, the way he just checkmated Jan Nepomniachtchi's king in those final few moves, getting the queen on the back rank, queen g1, queen h1, just absolute precision, and that checkmate with the knight on that central square. That's going to be a tough one for Jan Nepomniachtchi to get out of, but he needs to do that. Jan starts with the black pieces in the next one, but also equally impressive, Denis Lazavik against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave.
Didn't get to cover that game too much. It was just very level throughout. Denis, he's so good at keeping control and just justifies his billing as the underdog. Gets that draw. Great result for young Denis. In the meantime, looks like we're jumping straight back into the action. We're awaiting Wesley So's return to his laptop screen, to that chair, that setup, whatever we're going to call it. Wesley getting ready to fight. I've got to say, guys, I love what he did in game 1. He just needs to do it all over again in game 2. Just with Magnus.
And I was just about to say, are we going to see a 1b3, an opening that Wesley So played in the grand final, in the season tour final in 2023 against Magnus Carlsen? But we're not seeing any of that. He starts with the Queen's Pawn opening. And wow, Magnus going, are we going to see a King's Indian by Magnus in this one?
Oh, well, it depends. Yeah, I was going to say, it depends what kind of mood he was in. But David, you saw it before I could even respond. Do you see Wesley, by the way? He's like bringing up his blanket, making sure that it's sitting nicely on his lap, as we are going to venture into one of the most aggressive openings from the black side, if Wesley allows it to happen, because you could take this into quieter waters if he so chooses.
The King's Indian defense, Magnus only really plays it when he's all out for blood, for victory. I very rarely see Magnus employ this defense when he's happy to just kind of keep things solid, when he just wants to kind of grind it out in a long endgame. This one, only in the biggest of occasions, in must-win situations with black usually. So it's a big sign from Magnus to Wesley saying, yes, you got close in round 1, but now I'm going to fight fire with fire and I'm going to come back at you. And Robert, you mentioned taking the game into quieter waters. I don't want to see Wesley, for example, trade off pawns in the center here. I don't want to see him trade off and get the queens off the board, which he has done in the past on occasion. Nope, he castles, keeping all the tension. And this one's shaping up nicely. Mainline King's Indian, all these romantic openings, these attacking openings, they're coming back into fashion, which we love to see. So many King's Gambits in Tata Steel. And now in the Champions Chess Tour, the King's Indian instead. And Magnus just choosing the way he's going to set up. Knight to d7, knight to c6, taking on d4. Magnus has played on occasion. h6 is the trendy move here. All the cool kids are playing. I don't understand it, but plenty of choice. Magnus, the first to pause.
And for Magnus Carlsen, as you said, he doesn't really play this that often. And you look to the left of the board, that shows the statistics when this opening is played in master level games. So Wesley So, he knows that this opening should be good for white. In fact, the engines, they love it because they like the extra space that white gets, especially if you push this pawn from d4 up to d5. But by releasing the tension, if white in fact does push this pawn, black will move the knight away from f6 and play f5 himself, opening up the king side. So Wesley, he knows that the computer is a fan of this from the white side. He has experience, but he also has experience playing Hikaru Nakamura, who crushed him in one game, because this opening can be vicious from the black side depending on how white tries to adopt the setup.
And white needs to now decide. It is that moment, because with Magnus's last move, eyeing that knight on f3, there's more pressure on that central d4 pawn. So finally, Wesley has to take a call. He either captures on e5 or blocks the center with the move d5. David, is there a third option to try to keep the tension going here?
Perhaps a third option would be to use the bishop and guard this square, but I favour your choices there, Tanya. Depending on Wesley's mood, I think the most ambitious, if Wesley's up for a fight, okay, he actually plays the third choice there, bishop to e3. I was going to say he could push his pawn forward. Oh, the computer's such a harsh critic, giving that move a question mark. But he could also have taken the pawn off on e5, and there would have been a bunch of exchanges. So bishop to e3, let's ignore that question mark for now. I think this time we'll give Wesley the benefit of the doubt. But this is perhaps not approved of by computers, because after a trade on f3, Magnus, I think that would be the consistent follow-up. He goes for it. Now, after a trade, he's going to bring his knight out, and this bishop A bit similar to Robert pointing out in the previous game, Magnus's bishop on the long diagonal. This is going to be the MVP, the most valuable piece, and Magnus, I think he's going to be happy. Dark square bind. White's bishop on f3 is just blocked in, staring at its own pawns. So I like what Magnus has done. Wesley, not the most ambitious way of fighting against the King's Indian.
But this is ambitious from the black side. There's a famous game, maybe the stem game of this variation, Wojciech versus Fabiano Caruana, where Fabiano played bishop on g7, takes knight on c3. That seems unthinkable to our chess learners out there. You're giving away the bishop that helps protect the dark squares in front of your king. Whenever you're fianchetto, you typically want your bishop to sit there because it stares across the diagonal and protects squares like h6 and f6 down the line, so your opponent cannot invade. But bishop takes c3 has a clear point that with rook e8, the black knight is stepping forward to e5 and c5, that white's pawns, they do well to take care of critical squares, but they're also extended quite far and thus vulnerable. So these are big decisions for both players, and I think that they have that stem game, the Wojciech-Caruana game, in their mind.
And I think this last move by Wesley goes against that plan that you were pointing out, because if black was to capture on c3, now you can take with the queen. You don't really compromise on the pawn structure, and you get all the advantages of the bishop pair. Meanwhile, David, I think white is also threatening the move bishop to h6. To my understanding, black shouldn't trade the pair of bishops in these positions. How can Magnus avoid these further trades here?
I love it, Tanya. Thinking about what the opponent wants, the opponent might want to just get rid of this sniper on g7, this archer from afar. So by playing a move such as rook to e8 here, I'll just put this on the board, rook to e8. Now suddenly black would be free to decide what to do with this bishop. Yes, you can still trade them off, but you also have the added option of simply dropping back, keeping the bishop on the long diagonal and saying to white, actually, your bishop looks pretty, but it's not doing anything on h6. And if we go back to the game, wow, he's just taking it off immediately. Robert the Prophet, just taking that piece. Wow.
They tell you to study your classics. I know that a game from a few years ago isn't considered a classic because not enough time has gone by, but Fabiano Caruana teaches not just us, but Magnus Carlsen a very important and instructive lesson that sometimes it is okay to say, to heck with the rules. The principles that I learned, sometimes we can throw them out the window if the position calls for it. And look at this. Queen f6, queen trade being offered. We talk about the bishop pair advantage. Here it's the knights that are going to do some damage because they can stare and hop over pieces. A knight on e5, hit a bishop on f3, a pawn on c4. A knight on f6 or c5 hits that pawn on e4. And to protect that pawn on e4, you have to move your dark square bishop. But as soon as that bishop leaves e3, a knight can jump into d4 as well. So many critical squares are black's knights for the taking. I think Wesley has to be very careful here. It's not like the engine hates his position, but it does seem easier to play from the black side because the bishop on f3 in particular, it does not have a useful diagonal. It's staring into its own e4 pawn. And if it tries to move to a new diagonal, it stares into its own c4 pawn. No active real estate for that bishop.
Really instructive. I'm going to go check out that game, Wojciech against Caruana, just to remind myself. And clearly Magnus has been studying Fabi's games there, really kind of catching Wesley off guard. We see the clock situation. Magnus in kind of a minute and a half up on the clock could be important for later. But yeah, just breaking all the rules. But you've got to know the rules in order to figure out when to break them. And yeah, these knights, I'm always biased towards bishops, but on this occasion, I'll give Magnus the benefit of the doubt. They're jumping, the knights coming in. It looks like Wesley, the one with questions to answer. I think this is the perfect moment to zoom out. Maybe we go to the bird's eye view as Magnus applies pressure to Wesley's position. And okay, lots of different types of games. Ooh. Some more exciting than others, I've got to say. Where are your eyes drawn, Tanya?
It's the one on the extreme right of our screen. You got Alireza Firouzja against Fedoseev. And the position is all kinds of bonkers. White's got a queen out on h4. The kings are in the center. There's a knight on b5. Black's pawn already on d4. That's the position that has gotten my attention. While meanwhile, we see the central boards. It's pretty level between Wesley and Magnus still. Let's do a deep dive into this one.
And normally we won't do this. This is fast, furious, rapid chess. But I'm going to do a quick rewind to the start of this game because it is crazy, as you mentioned, Tanya. So unorthodox, so irrational, this position. White has just won a pawn, but black... Wow. Okay, we'll do a very quick dive. It started life as a Caro-Kann, and in advanced variation, it was pawn to c5, just blowing open the center. And after a capture, White's queen takes on d4. And yeah, let's catch up. The white queen dancing. It gets harassed so often. Remember, kids, remember, folks, don't bring your queen out too early. She is the most valuable piece. Anytime she gets hit, she has to move. And let's show this tactic on the board. It's super cool. Knight takes pawn. Now, ignoring the knight, taking this one instead. If the knight had been captured, then queen to a5 is a well-known fork, a double attack. Black regains the piece with interest. So bishop to e2, the reply from Firouzja, and this is the game position. And okay, a check. Feels like it's calming down slightly, but still nice to see the players kind of throwing out these crazy creative moves early on.
Well, it seems like the calm before a potential second storm, because black has not developed the kingside pieces. You see the knight on g8, the rook on h8, they're sitting at home. And this a2 pawn is loose. Do not get greedy. Prioritize your development and to make sure your king is safe, because if you first swap knights, so the black knight isn't hanging on e5, and then you decide to take this pawn on a2, white is just going to castle the king, give you that second pawn on b2, and then go right after your king with moves like rook to e1, rook to b1. The engine actually says that this is okay for black. That is shocking to my eyes, because it does feel like with the black king still in the center, not castling anytime soon, you should just be hopeless. I think practically speaking, there's no way you survive, but an engine, it's the best chess player on the planet for a reason. It's heartless. It's cold-blooded. And it says, I can defend this even though I have activated absolutely nothing besides my queen.
I'm going to say he's never, ever going to do this. He's never going to try this. And, of course, he doesn't. Knight to f6. He's too well-trained, classically trained there, Fedoseev. He gets his pieces out. And really instructive there, Robert. I totally agree. I don't think any grandmaster would seriously consider getting that trigger-happy, that pawn-hungry, and start grabbing on a2. Now it's just time for black to get castled. Do the same as white. And level material. Which side do you favour here, Tanya? Whose side do you think is easier to play?
Just really slightly, I like white here. And I think that's because of the piece activity and the placement of the pieces. Without the dark square bishop on g7, I think the black king will be slightly vulnerable on the king side as well. Also notice how white can line up the rook on e1 and start targeting that e7 pawn eventually once the knights on the center of the board are traded off. The bishop, whether it lands eventually on f3, which I think it might now, with this knight trade, you could recapture with bishop takes knight, bring that rook to e1. Just feel that white's pieces are more active. And like you said, David, easier to play. And in this time format, that is the most critical thing.
Firouzja, having won the first game of today, he can use that kind of to good effect, I feel. Like this type of position, he's pretty much provoking Fedoseev, maybe on the next move, to go and grabbing this pawn. I said he would never do it on the last move, but at least now he's one move only away from castling. It feels slightly kind of less risky to go for that pawn now. But Firouzja, with that win up his sleeve already, draws not the worst result. And okay, he takes with the knight instead. Bit of a surprise. The knight looks really beautiful in the center. The white bishop now not happy about that decision. But ultimately, it feels like black should just get castled. Don't risk taking this pawn. I don't even see a specific concrete reason not to, but it feels all wrong. And Fedoseev, he goes for it. Commentator's curse.
Way. I am shocked that Fedoseev made this decision, but perhaps it's influenced by the first game of the match. Remember, he did lose game one with the white pieces when Firouzja was able to queen at the end. So he's thinking, it might be now or never. Let's mix it up. But bishop c4, I think this is why Alireza took with the knight rather than with the bishop. Yes, a bishop on f3 looked great, but here a bishop on c4 hits the queen on a2 and the pawn on f7. And if you continue to be pawn hungry and you grab this pawn on b2, I think you can move your rook to e1, but the c1 rook, it's counterintuitive, but if you move the f1 rook instead, the rook on c1 was loose in many of the resulting positions. But if you slide the c1 rook away, as you show castle, rook takes e7 is no longer possible, but with a rook on f1 safely tucked away, you can successfully grab this pawn in the 7th rank. So just try to envision that in these positions, there could have been a rook on c1, which would have made this line impossible. Now, instead of leaving the rook on c1, that's the rook that steals the pawn on the 7th rank.
I just want to go one move further, one move deeper. Black can steal a third pawn. He's said A, B, he might as well say C and take the C pawn, but white will, at the very minimum, start doubling up, stacking up the rooks, and it feels like there's going to be all sorts of trouble. Black's queen, remember, has to guard this knight, otherwise queen takes knight using the E-file pin. But already all sorts of tactics in the air. I'm looking at the white knight leaping forward to hit the f7 pawn, maybe even sacrifices on this square in the near future. Black's king will not survive this storm. So if we go back to the game position, I think Firouzja, he's just got to go for it, provoke this second pawn capture, bishop c4, initiative play, momentum, at every move with a threat, and white builds up this phenomenal attack. He doesn't see the evaluation bar, of course. He doesn't even play bishop c4, but now at least Fedoseev can get castled. He's trying to transpose into that variation, Robert, but you mentioned it, the wrong rook. White's c-rook needed to be on this square, hence maybe this red cross that we see attached to this last move, a miss from Alireza Firouzja.
Oof. And it's difficult to move a rook that's already seemingly developed, although a rook on c1 isn't exactly active. But it's because that rook is loose there in many of these continuations. Bishop c4, queen takes b2. Now it becomes apparent what I was trying to indicate earlier, that the c1 rook is undefended, loose pieces drop off. It does not allow the rook on e1 to freely take a pawn in its path. So Alireza, he is playing this inaccurately. Fedoseev, he's up on the clock. He's also up a pawn. So if things don't clarify soon, I believe that Fedoseev can play for the upper hand. His position, it doesn't look that scary anymore. And I love this move that Firouzja just played. Queen to b4, defending his loose pawn, attacking black's pawn on e7, and threatening to trap the queen on a2.
Bishop c4, big threat now on the board. The black queen is defenseless, no squares to run to. So you have to be really careful now. I guess first instinct would be to flee. Lift up your skirts, run back to safety if you're the black queen, but maybe something more ambitious as well for Fedoseev. He's a very ambitious player. He didn't grab that pawn on a2 just to run away with his queen. So big moments ahead in this game. But the valuation bar says roughly level, and I think for now we have to trust it. Let's zoom out to the bird's eye view. Let's see if the other games have caught up in terms of excitement right now. And okay, we see on the left of your screens, Denis Lazavik against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. It's a rook endgame, level pawns, level pieces. Feels like it's fizzling out towards a draw. Martinez against Nepomniachtchi, also level in a rook and knight endgame. I might favour Nepomniachtchi's chances, but roughly level for now. And Wesley So against Magnus Carlsen. Robert, Tanya, what do you think? Should we stick with our current game or go to one of those simplified positions?
I think we have to head over to Magnus's game. He's up a pawn currently. Pieces look active, but Wesley trying to get both his rooks on the 7th rank. So let's get a quick check-in with Wesley under 2 minutes on the clock, this time on the defense. And that's super scary. When you're playing against Magnus Carlsen, an endgame that he's pushing, it is so hard to keep things under control. But it looks like white has compensation here, right? You've got this dark squared bishop that can line up on the long diagonal. The rook from b2 is jumping on to b7 to try to create some threats. Yes, I see black is a pawn up, but to me, practically, it looks like Wesley's got his chances. What do you think, Robert?
I love Magnus's position, and if we do have a couple seconds, I actually want to point out that Magnus made 4 great moves in a row. He earned those exclamation points because Wesley sacrificed a pawn, thinking that he would probably get it back quickly, and the answer is no, he's not, and he does have activity, but yeah, if you just go back right before knight takes b4, Wesley, he gave up a pawn there, and that 4 moves in a row were exclamatory from the black side. You stole the pawn, the rook slid to b3, and then Magnus was able to keep his extra pawn. This looked like the obvious try from white, but look at how Magnus danced with his knights. First, hitting the rook on b3. The rook slides back. Then planting a knight on c2 to save the knight that's under attack, hitting the rook in the corner. The rook slides to hit the knight that is now hit twice by 2 rooks, and he takes a bishop on f3, returns his knight to d4. He does steal a pawn in this position, so it's great. And knights jump in to steal a Destiny's Child song, and it landed Magnus an extra pawn, and now we have the game position, which does look like it's fizzling out. I think Wesley had just enough compensation. Tanya, you seem to be right.
Yeah, I think so, because... Go on, David.
I was just going to say, you take it away, Tanya, but when I first saw this position on the bird's eye view, I didn't count the pawns correctly. I thought, okay, Wesley's doing really well. But that beautiful kind of sequence of knight jumps, giving black the advantage. Tanya, how easy is it for Wesley to guide this game towards safety, do you feel?
It's not going to be easy. He's playing against Magnus. He's down a pawn, and that's never going to be easy. But again, I'm just going to reiterate the fact that this bishop on the long diagonal is not only doing a great job on this one, but is now going to target that other pawn on a5. And to me, it looks like Magnus has to try to get activity. He needs to jump in with that rook. Is he going to try to somehow find any mating net ideas against the white king? Rook b3 comes to my mind, trying to get play on the king side. I don't think you can go passive trying to defend that a5 pawn. What would be your approach with black if you're pushing for a win here?
It's difficult to choose. Sorry, David. I was just going to say, it feels like, as black, you want to activate your king, but you don't have anywhere to go. So, David, you're the endgame maestro. You have some loose pawns on a5 and maybe g5. How would you actually approach this position?
Normally, I love my endgames when you have some level of stability and you can kind of slowly improve your pieces. Unfortunately, it's one of those, it's pure calculation. I just wanted to point out Tanya's move, Rook b3. It's the most tempting, and it would be super strong if it wasn't for the fact that white could immediately force a draw with a check, another check, and black's king actually cannot escape from these barrage of checks. So really frustrating for Magnus. You can see that on the camera. And if we go back to the game position, after bishop c3, he's frozen. He hasn't moved. What can he do? I don't see it, I've got to admit. It's really hard to come up with an idea. Knight to h4 instead, he tries, going after that pawn on f3, that straggler. But okay, at least he's trying to initiate a race from Magnus Carlsen. And he's given the black king an extra escape square. I think this might be really sneaky if the black king sneaks out via h7, g6, f5 a bit later on. But Wesley, wow, exclamation mark for that move. He correctly assesses that he can just trade everything off. And now after the rook comes back and takes this pawn, g5 is loose, a5 is loose. First, he just defends. 2 pawns down, Wesley, so, but he's got everything under control. I'm going to say it now, I think he's kind of earned the draw. He's done it the hard way, but he's earned his half point.
I'm loving the way Wesley's handling these complicated positions, and you could see the frustration on Magnus right there. I think he missed this idea of Wesley not snapping up that c5 pawn immediately, allowing black's rook to jump into the attack with that b3 square and picking up that f3 pawn. But he just simply sidesteps with the king. It's what we saw in round 1 as well. Wesley, with the black pieces, sacrificed the piece, went for the most combative option, and Magnus was on the back foot. And it looks like Magnus did everything, created everything in this game, got the maximum, and yet it's not enough. Wesley's defense has been on the active side today. It's more of the offense kind of a defense. I'm loving it.
This endgame here, it's even material at long last, but I think that white may have some good chances because the a-pawn, knights are slow-moving pieces. You have to watch out for a passer on the flank. But the f3 pawn, a light square, hard to defend with a dark squared bishop. So both sides have their pluses here, and Wesley, he's taking the safest approach, bringing his bishop back, keeping that knight honest to the g5 pawn, and we may see a repetition. So I do think this one is fully equal, but if we don't mind, if we go to the bird's eye view, one of the other games that is still going. That one looks like it's anyone's race, and it is a pawn race between Jose Martinez, second from the left here, and Jan Nepomniachtchi.
Wow, look at that pawn race. Also, we should mention Firouzja, according to the bar at least, has a winning advantage, a big attack. But let's jump into that game, Martinez against Nepomniachtchi. We're seeing some checks, we're seeing some moves here. It's all about the quality of pawns, not about the quantity, black being a pawn up in that game. And okay, also about the clock quality here with Jose Martinez down to 20 seconds again. He's really living life on the edge on kind of both board and clock. I wanted to say black's got a great advantage, the pawn running down, but white does have just enough counterplay. Not just is this pawn hanging, but the knight would then be hanging behind it. And some calculation to be done, Nepomniachtchi. Help me out. Tanya, do you see any good way for black to defend this pawn while keeping his dreams alive of pushing for glory?
You really want to push that a-pawn, but the d5 pawn was hanging, so he defends it. He saves me from your question, David. Such a difficult one to answer. How to go ahead in this position. It's all about the race. Now the knight from e3 can also perhaps go back to f5, fighting against the g-pawn as well. Black a pawn up, but with just... with 3 minutes on the clock for Nepo and just 18 seconds for Jospim, he has to keep the tension on the board. He has to try to get that G-pawn moving. I think this is trouble. And I see the eval bar says equal, but I think Jan Nepomniachtchi could score his comeback win in this one, Robert.
I'm totally with you because look at Jospim. He's slowing down, trying to figure it out. He does put his king on the last file. If you take that pawn a4, there could be some checkmating nets against it. And while rook g4 defends the a4 pawn by hitting the knight, and whoa, that's a huge decision. What happens if black takes that pawn? I think a4 is untouchable.
If you take this pawn now, you walk into a pin on the 4th rank, so he wisely throws in a check first. He's asking the black king where it's going, and Wow, this is incredible play, incredible defense by Jospem here, because now if the Black King steps forward where it wants to go, the White Knight drops back with a check, this pawn will drop, then the A pawn will drop, and Black's pawns collapse like dominoes, so he has to go back if he wants to keep this game alive, but suddenly the White Knight jumps forward, and it goes to grab the C pawn, all of the Knight forks, all of the Knight jumps. Smile on the face of Nepomniachtchi, frustrated, I think, by this just rock-solid defense from his opponent on the back foot here. Again, Jospem, how is he doing this? Living life on the edge, but always seems to have a trick up his sleeve.
And it's on the clock. He's got less than 10 seconds. He still manages to do it, but there's so much drama on the other boards. We're going to quickly pull up our bird's eye view. We've got a result coming in as Denis Lazavik holds Maxime Vachier-Lagrave for the second game in a row. Meanwhile, massive drama on the Wesley board as Wesley gets flagged, Robert. What happened?
I'm very surprised, but it looks like on that board that Magnus's pieces were infiltrating and the White King was in some danger. We will get more information if it was a connection issue or Wesley just wasn't keeping an eye on the clock. But I'm keeping an eye on the board on the absolute right-hand side of our screen. Fedoseev, he was under attack. But as I look at the position as it currently stands, he has 2 minor pieces for a rook. So Fedoseev lost game 1. He's suddenly willing himself to victory in game 2, it would appear, as he's got a runaway passer on the A file and 2 minor pieces, a knight and bishop for a rook. That's extra material.
Oh, and Firouzja made that move with 0.3 of a second left. So frustrated here. There's nothing that can be done. I was going to say Black's pawn is just now going to push, and first he defends it. 2 pieces will beat a rook, especially in conjunction with this Black A pawn. White simply cannot fight here without this pawn. Even then, Black might be better. But Firouzja, he had a winning attack. He let it slip, took his finger off the button for 1 second, and comeback from Fedoseev in this match. Actually, the Black Knight now can just come into c2 in the next few moves and push this pawn for glory. There's no way it's going to be stopped. First, he activates his king, closing this one out. We're going to see another equal match here, another tight match after this miraculous comeback, I've got to say, from Fedoseev. Proving that greed was good. He played provocative chess, but ultimately should be rewarded.
Well, he didn't just want to make a draw and have to rely on future games. And I just want to note that Fedoseev, he kind of is a miracle worker. How he beat Vidit Gujrathi in the penultimate round of the World Rapid Championship, and Fedoseev ended up as the silver medalist. So he has had bad positions before and still won them. Here in this position, it's hopeless for White. That A pawn, 2 minor pieces for the rook. It's easy for Vladimir at this point.
Firouzja looking frustrated on the camera, and Nepomniachtchi has got to be feeling the frustration as well as his game ends in a draw. Jospem holds a difficult endgame with just seconds on the clock. Down a pawn, he does it again, which means that Jan is also still playing catch-up. Meanwhile, Fedoseev, can he get the job done? Can he level it? And he does it as Alireza throws in the towel. He resigns. Fedoseev is back in the match.
Oh, what a boss move there. He wins the match, gives up his knight to promote his pawn, and then just stands up. He knows that he kind of survived through a really difficult game there and gets an all-important win. Firouzja, again, that trend continues. He seems to win, lose. Same from his Tata Steel tournament. So a bit of frustration, but still in a good spot in the match. I think we will recap that Magnus Carlsen game as well in a moment. But these are the results so far in the quarterfinals of Division I.
We're 2 games. It's halfway through the winners' quarterfinals, and Denis Lazavik, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave remains a level match. Meanwhile, Alireza, Firouzja, Vladimir Fedoseev also level, but a completely different storyline with 2 decisive games. Fedoseev striking back levels the match. Jose Martinez, he continues his birthday week fun as he's still in the lead against Jan Nepomniachtchi. Magnus Carlsen does a surprising turnaround. We thought that everything was under control for Wesley, so he managed to survive the worst. But then, Magnus suddenly taking the win. Robert, how much of a surprise is that for you? Because I'm shocked right now.
It was shocking indeed, because Wesley he is great at all time controls, including bullet chess, but sometimes when pressure keeps mounting, it's hard to show resistance forever. So I want to give credit to Magnus Carlsen for finding his chances. I also want to give another shout out to Vladimir Fedoseev winning on demand against Alireza Firouzja. Sure, Firouzja doesn't always show stability, but beating that guy, ooh, that's difficult. So congrats to Fedoseev, but the job is not done. We still have 2 games to go in these matches.
Yes, and it is the action, the drama continues in the Chessable Masters, and of course we will be back with more as there are 2 more rapid games remaining. But just to get a breather, we're going to take a quick stroll through Paris with the French defense maestro Anish Giri. Take a look.
Welcome to a world where each game writes a new story with endless possibilities and surprising twists. We present the next big new tournament, the Freestyle Chess GOAT Challenge. At the forefront of this epic chess spectacle is none other than Magnus Carlsen, the former world champion, facing his first duel with the reigning world champion DenLaz since his title victory. In addition to this top duel, Carlsen has selected 6 other top challengers to make the tournament especially exciting. Be sure to watch all the games on the live stream at Chess.com and on our freestyle-chess.com website from February 9th to 16, 2024 at the first Freestyle Chess GOAT Challenge at the luxurious Weissenhaus Resort. Experience the thrill and fascination of chess in a completely new light.
When I saw her for the first time, it was love at first sight. I love how rich and complex she is, how sharp and principled her first steps, how graceful her movement. Paris is the city of love. I've come to find my love for the French defense.
Welcome back to Chessable Masters, everyone. We still got 2 big rapid games coming up. And talking about games, Robert, if you were just about to play against David Howell, what would be the one spell that you would cast on him right before the game?
You know, it's a good question, because to steal a line from Nina Simone, I'll put a spell on you. And I think, unlike the natural disasters in the world, well, it's a natural disaster on my chessboard. So I'm going to use Tornado against you, David. I hope that messes you up.
Robert, I'm going to throw back a free spell on you and hope that gives me a bit of luck in the game.
Well, Robert's frozen. I'm sure some of the players in the Chessable Masters would also like to cast, unfreeze Robert, would also like to cast a spell on their opponents as they're playing catch up as we go into round 3. But you can play some spell chess on AnyChess. Use the command AnyChess in chat or go to Chess.com for all the spell chess action and a spell fun on your opponents. We're about to have some fun in the Chessable Masters as we enter round 3. Let's take a look at our score lines just before the action starts. And there we are. Wesley So needs to win a game to level the match. Alireza Firouzja, Vladimir Fedoseev, 2 decisive games. It's level in their matchup. Meanwhile, Nepomniachtchi is struggling against Jose Martinez. And I know, Robert, you're a Jospem fan. You've spoken so much about his style, his speed in online chess. What is it that makes him so strong?
He plays practically. He is able to be a bullet beast. He plays in all the bullet brawls on Chess.com. He's been in the Bullet Chess Championship. So is his play perfect? Absolutely not. Does he sometimes struggle in the openings? Yes. But he knows when to make these quick decisions and how to use his clock wisely. And you can't punish him when he is down under 20 seconds like you can other players. So Jose, he's very solid. He is hard to, take down in a tactical skirmish. He's just a very all-around player and one that uses his time when he's down to those final seconds quite wisely.
And Jospem has played over 100,000 games on Chess.com, David, and I know you're someone who's always playing Bullet, Blitz right before commentary starts. I've got to ask you before we get into chess action, how many games have you played on Chess.com?
Well, I don't think I can match this man's efforts on Chess.com. I know I'm in the tens of thousands, but 100,000 games. I mean, it's no coincidence that the top players become good at chess. It's like any sport. It's like playing an instrument. You have to practice. And Jospem's taken that to the extreme, but it's paying off now. And as Robert said, a practical player. He never seems to get flustered, no matter how badly the opening goes. Even a middle game slip up, he always comes back strong. And now it's up to Nepomniachtchi to come back strong. A point down still with only 2 games to go. He'll have to start taking risks. And that's where Jospem becomes even more dangerous. This is not going the way of the favorite on paper. And I can't wait to see what he tries next to Nepomniachtchi. I also can't wait to see how Wesley So recovers from that heartbreaking defeat on the brink of a draw against Magnus in that previous game. We kind of wrote it off, but nope, something went a bit wrong on the board, on the clock, and Wesley, he needs to strike back, needs to come back stronger.
Yeah, and Wesley So losing with the white pieces in game 2, that's got to hurt. He starts with black. He needs to make sure to keep things under control. If Magnus wins with white in this one, that would be match over for Wesley. So Wesley has to keep things under check. Magnus starts with the king's pawn opening. Are we expecting a Sicilian, Robert?
Well, when Wesley's in must-win territory, he often chooses the Sicilian. But why does he have to win this game? If he draws with black, he does get a final game with the white pieces. And let's not forget, it's not like he was lost on the board in that second game. He lost on the clock. So for Wesley, I think this is the smart thing to do. If Magnus wants to force the draw in some Berlin, let him do that and use the white pieces in game 4.
Big indicator, Wesley So's opening choice, the Berlin defense, that he would have been happy with solidity and just a draw with black straight off the bat. Magnus, with his opening choice, playing a pawn to d3, just slow pawn moves here, defending the center, not allowing any quick transitions here, not allowing pieces to fly off the board. Magnus hinting that he wants a full-blooded fight as well. So great to see from both sides. I'm loving the fact that Magnus has kept the tension, and Wesley's last move, just shuffling his rook towards the center. Not the main move, but just keeping the tension alive. Magnus is probably the world's leading expert in these slower types of Spanish opening. This is one of those branches. So I'm just curious now to see how he approaches this next phase of the game. All pieces on the board and likely to stay that way for a long, long time now. And you guys, I'm going to ask you first, Tanya, are you as optimistic after seeing this opening choice as I am of a real battle in this clash, in this third game?
You know, when Wesley wants a draw, it's hard to imagine us getting a game. But that said, Magnus goes for a line that does keep the tension on the board, keeps the pieces on the board. I think it's going to be a slow one, but Magnus will play this out. I don't believe we're going to see too many trades early on. It's still a closed position. It's going to be a slow strategic fight. I'm going to go one step ahead and predict the result in this. I think we're going to get a game 4 in this match, David. I think regardless of how Magnus chooses to go on in the middle game, it will end in a draw. But Robert, you seem to not agree with me in this one.
No, I just like your prediction. I think that Wesley, he is showing that he's willing to fight for the center by striking with d5. We are just going to see him recapture. But the fact that he hasn't automatically played yet, it indicates to me that he's not so certain about what to do here, and that should favor Magnus. So this isn't some deep theoretical position, at least not from the black side. You could tell by Wesley, he has yet to move. But unlike some of the other games that we're seeing, it feels like they're just playing a neutral position to see who plays the better chess.
And I was about to say, Wesley, he paused for a reason. And Robert, you were talking about maybe capturing it back in the center. There were a bunch of choices you could take with the knight, with the queen. He actually counterattacks against the white bishop. And this is a rare move, but it's a known move. Levon Aronian, one of the leading experts again in the Spanish opening, he has employed it on occasion, hitting this bishop. And it's actually a pawn sacrifice. Magnus takes the knight, and he could even have taken this pawn on c6, but then his pawn would have dropped in the center. So now allowing Wesley to regain the material, expecting the move. Queen takes d5 here, and yes, black has shattered pawns, a shattered structure, but black is supremely active. And for example, after a trade of pieces on the c5 square, opposite color bishops into the mix as well. So maybe, at least symbolically, white has a small edge, Magnus removing as much risk as possible, but Wesley playing ambitious chess. Nice to see. And clearly both players, they might have spent a bit of time, but still in their opening preparation, I feel.
Yeah. And if Magnus doesn't capture that bishop on c5, it would give Wesley the option to actually fall back with the bishop to b6 on the next move and keep the bishop at advantage. With the d file open, the d3 pawn weak, I think that would give Wesley something to play on for. I'm expecting Magnus to snap up the bishop and go for the opposite color bishop position that you're talking about. But with the asymmetrical pawn structure, I think we've got a game in our hands. This is a very non-standard Berlin.
No, this is not standard at all. Yeah, sorry, David. I was just going to say that those bad pawns for black, those could be long-term weaknesses, but the opposite colored bishops that we're likely to see that should compensate, but not fully equalize. Magnus has been known to win positions with even less of an advantage than this.
He's been known to win all sorts of positions. Actually, both of these two have. And I was just going to say, I like it, Tanya. I love your predictions, just that enthusiasm about seeing a real fight in this one. And Magnus going for it. Big move on the board. d4, he drops it in. And now there's a big dilemma ahead for Wesley. If you take this pawn, you might be hit in the center. I'm not sure which way Magnus intends to recapture. Either he'll take on e5 with his own pawn, maybe potentially with the knight. But if you take on d4, you're in for a bit of suffering. I was going to say, this one I'm reluctant to suggest, because suddenly if the queens come off, then black's pawn structure, the weaknesses become more pronounced. So Wesley, I feel, has to keep the queens on the board. Do not trade. You're facing the best endgame player of all time. I've even got Magnus's book behind me. Don't go into the endgame. He'll grind you down. So keep the queens on. Queen to h5. Yeah, this one is still roughly in the balance, but I don't like this little... last couple of moves from Wesley. So I think now it is getting critical already. Keep the queens on. Best way to keep your chances alive in this match.
And
I think
so
I need
humble.
a t-shirt saying that, Robert, that don't go into endgames with Magnus Carlsen. But I think in this particular position, Wesley will definitely not do that. Expecting him to try to slide over to the king side, queen h5, get a knight on g4, get a bishop on g4, try to play for more. Robert, I'm keeping my optimism that we're going to still have a long game in this one.
Well, I was first going to say David is very humble because he co-wrote that book. He knows how to grind like a grandmaster himself. And then I'm thinking this is the type of position where the evaluation bar to the side of our board here says, white is maybe ever so slightly better or it's equal. But if Wesley had traded the queens, I think Magnus wins that position the majority of the time. Double pawns are terrible to defend when you don't have much time on the clock, especially double isolated pawns, because a pawn's best friend is another pawn. David, if you could just pick up the pawn on c6 for a second, just like hover with it and put it on b6. If that pawn were on b6, then I'm like, all right, this is just even, not a big deal, because the pawns can defend one another. But with the pawns stacked the way they are, it means that this is a long-term weakness that isn't going anywhere. And in particular, the c7 pawn, if a bishop safely goes out to f4, that c7 pawn, you have to tie a rook down to it. You don't want to use a piece that is worth 5 points in value to protect a piece that's worth just 1. So I do think the long-term chances are in white's favor, and that's why West is operating the short term. Queen h5, and as Tanya, you said, a bishop to g4, a knight to g4, use the open e-file. You need to play dynamically to compensate for your ruined queenside pawn structure.
Super instructive there, and getting to the essence of the position. This is going through the players' minds as well. That's pretty much what Wesley was telling himself as he made that decision. He likes his endgames as well, so the temptation would have been there. Trade queens, but then you break it down. Then you think, okay, it's all about the weaknesses. You're playing a great endgame expert. You don't want to suffer. Now at least it's not one-way traffic. And okay, bishop to g5. Very testing move, aiming to shatter not just the queenside pawns, which have already been broken, but also black's kingside. Bishop takes knight, a huge strategic positional threat now. It needs to be guarded against somehow, but moving the knight, there's not that many safe squares for it. Do you counterattack with your black bishop, bring it out to g4, play a bit of mirroring, copycat game there? You could aim to shatter white's kingside structure. It feels like this game is really livened up just in the last couple of moves. What comes to your mind? Big threat on the board.
Yeah, after this last move by Magnus, my optimism seems to be fading a little bit because bishop takes knight and Wesley's got to try to go on the defense with this. I really like the idea of jumping in with his own bishop to g4, but those trades, and he does it, bishop g4 has been played, but it looks like it might just fizzle out with all the upcoming trades. White could just capture on f6. White would take back on f3, and I think at the end of all this sequence, you either take back on f3, maybe we can have the moves, David, and you can help me out with it. But even if you were just to fall back with your bishop to bishop e5 is not possible because the rook takes on e5, and that would just lose the game on the spot. I think you have to take on f3 here. Bishop h4, or does that run into rook e4? There is no way to hide with the bishop.
No way, suddenly things would turn around, as you say, Tanya. Otherwise, white would be loving life, but unfortunately this double attack just in time to kick white off balance. And just to mention the other point you were highlighting in this position, black has at very minimum a check, hitting the white king, and now you can just take these off. And yes, shattered pawns, but without bishops, without knights, far harder to attack these pawn islands. And white not exactly enjoying life either with his structure. So everything's balanced here. This is a likely draw. This would actually be a logical conclusion to the game, Robert.
This is exactly what seems to be happening, and if that's the case, then a draw will keep Magnus with a 1-point lead. So I do trust Wesley at this stage with the queens coming off the board. Maybe Magnus can work his endgame magic, but it does seem very likely a draw will be the result. So why don't we zoom out of this game, look at our other 3 contests, because with 8 players in this double elimination bracket, I think that there is a lot up for grabs as Magnus, he's in charge. But some of the other matches, the favorites, namely Jan Nepomniachtchi and Alireza Firouzja, they have not had a steady first couple games. And I look second from the left right now, Jan Nepomniachtchi with white playing a closed structure. And then I look all the way to the right, Fedoseev against Firouzja. It seems like every time we look at their games, they are just like throwing axes at one another. They are not dodging a fight.
I think we should jump over there. Fedoseev against Firouzja, because remember, it is 1-1. It's only been decisive games so far, and there's a big double attack on the board. Black is actually a whole piece up, but this was intentional from Fedoseev. We see a double attack. We see a fork. Which piece has to move? It's obviously the queen here, but where do you move her? How do you get into white's camp? White's king. A bit airy here, and having pushed the pawn to g4, I think Fedoseev will be feeling a bit nervous. Very logical move, forcing white to regain the material. And white will temporarily be a pawn up, but it looks like black's ready to chip away at the white kingside structure. Evaluation bar says 0.0. Tanya, what's your vote? Whose position would you choose?
I would pick black all day, every day here. I'm loving the activity. The rook can slide into d8. Your idea of h5, opening up the h file, looks extremely scary. I could win a tempo, inserting rook to d8. If you go queen e2, the rook will come to the second rank as well with a tempo. Meanwhile, if the queen leaves the connection with the f3 square, I'm eyeing the move queen f3. I want to pick up your h3 pawn. So some really tempting options for black in this position, and he goes for h5. Really like this, David. You pointed it out. I think the things are getting very tricky for Fedoseev. He's the one who's up a pawn, but he could be down a king if he's not careful.
There's one problem for black, otherwise he might already be winning. If he could castle queenside, then the game is pretty much over. It uses your plan of rook to d8, but it also gets your king to safety while connecting your rooks. Maybe you double in the h-file later, but because you cannot legally castle through check, that does not allow Firouzja to get his king fully away from the center of the board. And if you play rook d8, well, your king doesn't want to go to the short side because you're trying to attack on that flank. So king g2, what a response from Fedoseev. He's allowing the h-file to open, rook d8 still available, and bishop takes e4 check becomes another option that wasn't available a turn ago. Now you can play it because the check against the white king, but you may see your own king be in harm's way after a series of trades. So this is a critical moment for Firouzja. If you don't take this pawn on e4 now, maybe white will soon play pawn to f3 and try to keep the extra pawn. So you need to play precise chess from both sides here. It's a messy position, but I would say that I think black has a little bit more to prove right now.
I actually want to go back and just mention Tanya's move, rook to d8. Maybe it was slightly more accurate to play it on the previous move, because now this looks so natural. But white has the move queen to f3. If the queens come off, we talked about it in the other game, suddenly it would clearly favor white. Not just up a pawn, but this bishop will be locked out the game. And but due to the slightly odd pawn structure, especially on the queen side, white would have a long-term advantage. So if black had flicked in this move earlier, this queen f3 idea was not available. He could pretty much have that move for free. White would have been forced to choose a worse square, for example, a one like this with the queen, but this would have allowed the black rook in. So sometimes move order is really important here. Suddenly black would have a big advantage, big attack on the white king. And instead, this simply isn't possible. Just to mention the other moves after king to g2, bishop takes e4, as Robert pointed out. This is committal. You win your pawn back, but at the cost of giving up castling rights for good. This check, and the black king sitting on f8. This is a lottery to me. I don't know whose king is weaker, but the players have to work that out as well. So right now, big decision ahead for Firouzja. Feels like Fedoseev maybe mixed up his opening slightly, but Firouzja failing to punish him so far. Still fine for black. Robert thinking more to prove for Firouzja. I'm inclined to agree. Also, pawn takes pawn. White would take that with the queen. If the queens disappear, clearly white is the one in charge. I'm loving the games between these two, I've got to say today. Just really entertaining chess.
We've had two decisive games between these two players. Alireza taking the first win, Fedoseev with black pieces striking in the second one, and both complete roller coasters. And this one looks like it's going that way. Even the position that you had on the analysis board, David, with black's king on f8, white's king in the open as well, with the fg and h pawn advanced in front of him. It's anyone's game. And I think a decisive result in this one is very likely as well. Robert, what would be your prediction? Do you think the players are going to try and trade off the pieces along the e-file, or we're going to get a bit of a bloodbath against each other's king?
I think that we are going to get that bloodbath. I mean, there is no hiding at this point. And for Firouzja, who is well down on the clock, the last thing he wants to see is a queen trade. So he wants to play pawn takes g4, but he sees that the white queen will just snack on that pawn right back. And white is a pawn ahead. Everything does look relatively solid for him. So Firouzja, you could see that he is not happy to be in this position. He thought that he would have easier forms of compensation, that there'd be a direct path to regaining his pawn deficit. But no, it's not that clear. Taking on e4, it does restore material equality, but the white king will be no safer. The black king will be no safer than the white king with a check along the e-file. I don't think that Firouzja wants to be in this position. And Vladimir Fedoseev, he can make him pay with this lead on the clock.
Oh, he spent so much time, pretty much half of his remaining time or more on that one move. Eventually does regain the pawn, and we'll see Fedoseev surely just get rid of that bishop, one of the potential attackers of the white king. And that whole variation we showed with the two kind of airy kings, it's just mutual attacking chances, despite the fact that there are all these trades. In the meantime, key position here, but let's briefly zoom out. I just wanted to do a quick roundup. The other games still in a quieter kind of mood, the other players. A draw between Vachier-Lagrave and Lazavik. They really are racing towards the Armageddon now. I think that's the most balanced match of the day. Nothing to choose between the two of them so far. The second game from your left, Nepomniachtchi against Martinez. Very, very symmetrical. I will say that Nepomniachtchi may be the slightly happier of the two. He has a better bishop. Carlsen against Wesley, so also racing towards a draw. So this is where the action's happening. Nepomniachtchi against Martinez and Fedoseev against Firouzja. I'm going to vote that we quickly jump into Nepomniachtchi Martinez before coming back to see how Fedoseev and Firouzja deal with the weaknesses of their kings. So let's jump over there and see whether Jan Nepomniachtchi can mount a comeback. My first instinct's correct. What do we think, Robert? Is White slightly better? I say slightly because it's tension-packed. Nepomniachtchi as he aims to launch the comeback.
Let's look at that game because we saw another draw between Maxime Vachier-Lagrave and Denis Lazavik. We apologize that we haven't looked at those games because there's been no separation between those two players. Very little room for excitement when your players are playing nearly perfect chess. It's not like you're going to be able to have a tactical finish to the game. So we look at this game on the other hand. Well, if a white knight could get to d5, White is definitely in charge. If a black knight could get to d4, White can actually snap a knight off there. So that knight from c7 is looking to reroute, and White doesn't have easy access to d5. I look at the clock, huge lead for Jan Nepomniachtchi in this position. I do feel like he should be slightly preferred because his bishop on e3 attacks pawns, c5 and h6. The bishop on f8, it's a very defensive piece with no open diagonals to work with. So I would take the open b file, the dark square bishops, but I do like that rerouting of the knight for black. So small pluses for each side leads to a relatively equal position.
The speed, Tanya, with which Jospem's playing, he's always down on the clock really early in these games, but somehow at the critical moments, he changes the tempo and suddenly an immediate reaction hitting this loose white knight, which was defended. How impressed are you? He seems to always have a reply up his sleeve, something in store.
Super impressive, right? And especially the speed with which he plays when he's down on seconds. And it's not just about the speed, because more important is the precision which he brings on with the speed. He goes for the most direct, most challenging options. It's never about neutralizing the position, trying to simplify it, because this position itself we see is really complicated. It's going to become more of a mess as the game progresses. The black knight eyeing the d4 square now. But I do agree with your initial feeling there, David, that White with this bishop, the black pawn stuck on c5, on the color of White's bishop, long term, it just feels that White will have that slight edge. Now, White's knight going towards d5. I do like Jan Nepomniachtchi's position here. I think Jospem has a big defensive task ahead of him.
Yeah, because if you ever capture a knight on d5, that really helps out White's pawn structure. And I think strategically that would be lost if you can imagine a black knight going to f just to stop a knight from getting to d5. So you see, here comes the white knight. Black's knight can jump in first. A knight on d4 and a knight on d5, they don't actually threaten anything. That's the good news. So for both of these players, they're jockeying for important squares, but I just don't see where the knockout blow is, and that's why I'm looking at the clock. I do like Jan Nepomniachtchi's lead on time. I think that for Jospem, there aren't, and that's Jose, for everyone who doesn't know his online username, that for Jose Martinez, it's not like he has a forced series of trades that liquidate the board and allows him to inch closer to the draw. There's a lot of life left in this position because you could see the makings of an attack, and wow, what a move that was. Knight, instead of going to d4, goes to f4. Do not fall for it. Don't take this knight on f4, because if e takes f4, David, the queen on c3 is under attack, as is the knight on e3.
Tactics galore. Suddenly, out of the blue, we're talking about a slow maneuvering game, not many variations to show, but this would be disastrous for White immediately. So do not touch this knight. If we go back to the game, knight to f4, this was reacted to with a retreat, a really sad move from Nepomniachtchi, but an important necessary evil to block out this black queen. The black queen, if she could have done it, would have slid nearer the white king. And look how both players, such practical players, you can tell how experienced they are in blitz chess, tucking their kings away safely to bed, just saying, okay, these kings are safe. They feel safer than Wesley so with his blanket right now. And now it becomes a bit more of a maneuvering game yet again. Nepomniachtchi begging for the queens to disappear because then the white king will eternally be safe. I wouldn't be avoiding that queen trade, actually, if I were Jospem. I think taking that queen off would have guided him closer towards safety, but keeping the queen on, maybe more ambitious. This is the only thing. You've got to make sure Her Majesty here doesn't get trapped. She's hit, but she had a safe square. And yeah, this one's anyone's game. So many tactics suddenly popping out of the woodwork. This is a pin. I don't know. In terms of the momentum of the game, it feels like it's up and down and both sides testing each other. Like back to d5, and Jospem, he's holding his own with just 40 seconds left on the clock. He's aiming to jump in. Really symmetrical, really balanced chances, but it feels like at some point someone is going to kind of press that chaos button, and I'm not sure whether this symmetry is going to last for too much longer.
I think Jose pressed that chaos button when he made that move knight to f4. We've seen these last couple of moves coming in with tempo. White's knight has landed on d5. Now the bishop going back to e1 has only retreated to go further to c3, trying to line up on this diagonal. Once the bishop lands on c3, you're also eyeing the e5 pawn. Meanwhile, Jose's queen drops back. He's touching the 30-second mark. Eventually, Black's knight has to land on d4. Robert, are we expecting knight d4? He goes h5 instead.
He's trying to fix the problem piece. That dark square bishop, it's staring into its own pawns. Bad bishops defend good pawns, but you want to create a good bishop. So h6 to the c1 diagonal, that's some open lines. But I do like how this game has been going for Jan Nepomniachtchi. He's been kicking Black's forces back. Now that the queens are off, there's no active play. And Jose, he is a fantastic, resourceful defender, but he likes activity. Now he is saddled with defense, the c5 pawn, the e5 pawn. And if the knight from e6 ever moves, watch out for knight c7 to hit your lonely a6 pawn. It is slightly better for white, but for now, Jose has everything under control.
Rerouting his bishop there. 16 seconds on the clock. The big question is whether he kind of can hold his nerve. History says that yes, he can, Jospem here. But the black bishop, I think he's just going to do what you said, Robert. He's just going to sit on a defensive square, and he's going to hope that he can build what we call a fortress. Just no entry points for white. Sooner or later, white will need to open up a second front. He's trying to get in with his bishop now. That is quickly, swiftly shut down. White will need to open the king side, whether that's with a move like pawn to h4, maybe pawn to g3 now that Jospem has kind of blocked the dark squares. He'll need to open a second front of attack. It's like an army. You're not getting anywhere on one side. Your opponent's blocking you, fighting you off. You have to open, kind of switch their attentions to the other flank of the board.
There's going to be a lot of grinding in this endgame as the knights are jumping around, but the pieces are also jumping around on our other board. We're going to pull up our bird's eye view of the remaining two games. Meanwhile, an update that Magnus Wesley ended in a draw. Maxime Denis Lazavik ended in a draw as well. But look at that. On the right, Ali Reza versus Fedoseev. The queens are on the board, the rooks are on the board, a queen trade offered, and we go into a rook pawn endgame. Is this going to fizzle out into a draw?
It looks like it. I mean, look at the pieces that remain. Black is 2 pawns ahead on the right-hand side of our screen. Now make it 1. But look at the b7 pawn in the rook side. The second rook on e2 will jump forward. And while Firouzja is giving up his queen side to go for the king side, I think this was a sensible decision. And Fedoseev will likely just defend his pawn. So I'm looking from left to right. The evaluation bar is more or less in the center in both these games, but they couldn't be more different. We have a minor piece endgame on the left and rook endgame on the right. David, you're like to grind like a grandmaster. Which endgame do you prefer?
I think the one on the right, I've got to say I love this camera angle. We see all the action, all the moves. I think Fedoseev against Firouzja is going to fizzle out. Rook endgames do have this drawish tendency. White's rooks are active enough, and Firouzja, even if he wins the pawn in front of the white king, I don't think that's going to get him anywhere. That one, destined for a draw. The other one, blocked, maneuvering, slow. Still, we call it an endgame, but it's going to go on for a lot longer. I still like Nepomniachtchi's chances, I've got to say. I think he's the one trying to make the magic happen. Ultimately, it's all about the clock as well. 5 seconds for Jose Martinez. He hold his nerve. I think both should be draws with best play, but commentator's curse. I don't want to predict too early. Still a lot of life left.
It's been amazing to see Jospem and his control on his nerves, as you say, David. He's got nerves of steel. We see the c5 pawn under attack with just 4 seconds. The knight has to jump to defend it. But the kind of positions he saved and turned around with just seconds on the clock has been so impressive in this event so far. My question to you right now is, can white actually double down on that c5 pawn? He does it, because the black knight on c6 is tied down to defend the e5 pawn. And now we are seeing the pawn structure change.
In the structure change, this game has just ended in a draw between Fedoseev and Firouzja, just showing you the final stages there. So let's jump back to that game. It was blocked, but no longer. The whole queenside disappeared, Tanya. The black pawns dropped for the white pawns, and suddenly the black king active. I see no reason at all, barring a miracle here from Nepomniachtchi or Jospem, to sweat. Unless there's a miracle checkmate in the middle of the board, which it doesn't look like there is. He's walking life, living life on the edge here.
That's what I was looking at, David, though. Like, the black king only has f6 right now is that the only square available to it. So if you could give one check in a funny way, that Black King could have been made in the center, but of course, you don't have enough pieces remaining for White.
Such a yo-yo position with the checks because Black's king needs to stay connected to the e4 pawn. White needs an extra piece to deliver checkmate, doesn't have it. I think we're going to see a repetition here.
You see the draw. Both players lean back. Nepomniachtchi smiling despite his deficit. Jose Martinez shaking his head. He knows that he lived life on the edge yet again. 3 games in a row. He's been living on the increment, on the added time. I don't know how much longer that can go on. He does have White, however, in the 4th and final game of kind of the regular time here. And I don't know who looks the happier. Jan Nepomniachtchi just always with his eyebrows raised these days.
Nepomniachtchi cannot be a happy man right now. He is trailing Jose Martinez, who has a 1-point lead. Jan Nepomniachtchi has to win on demand. A must-win game 4 coming up in that matchup as we see the scoreline 2-1. Chessable needs only a draw to advance in the winner's bracket. Meanwhile, Alireza, Firouzja, Vladimir, Fedoseev with their first draw of the day in Game 3. But it was a wild ride. Wesley saw Magnus Carlsen. Wesley has to strike back in the final rapid game. Meanwhile, Denis Lazavik, he is unbreakable with 3 draws against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. What was the standout moment for you in this one, David?
Oof, in this round, I've got to say it was probably those endgames, especially that game between Firouzja and Fedoseev. There were fireworks at the beginning, but ultimately both players just upping their game, just kind of pulling the brakes and going into solid mode towards the end. It was tough to call, though. It felt like this was just the players finding their balance, kind of saving energy for the 4th and final game, where some players now in must-win situations and really needing to just go all in, throw everything at the opponent.
Robert, what are the chances of us getting an Armageddon?
Extremely high. Have you seen the match between Denis Lazavik and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave? The answer is no, because they keep drawing. And Denis Lazavik has shown that his rating may be 25-50, 25-60, but the way he's performed on the biggest stages, the World Rapid, the World Blitz, the CCT Finals, he is well above 26-50 level in the quicker time controls. So we see Magnus on camera. We don't see Wesley. So for a second game in a row, Wesley is nowhere to be found when the games are beginning.
Back in just a few seconds. This is the final game 4. Wesley has to win. The good news for Wesley and Wesley fans is that he starts with the white pieces. And I want opening predictions. David, what's Wesley going to start with in this must-win game?
I don't know what he's going to start with, but I'll say he will not start with 1b3. We saw that too much in Toronto in the Tour Finals last year, back in December. I think he's going to start with d4 again. He faced the King's Indian last time. The King's Indian allows the opponent chances. But I'm wrong. Go to e4 instead. And what will Wesley do next? Okay, what do you think we'll see from here? Could still be Italian, Spanish. He's still got options.
If he goes bishop to b5, we're seeing a Berlin, is my prediction. And we've got an Italian. We've got a game on our hands, Robert.
We do, and oftentimes in these Italian quiet openings, you can just maneuver for a while, but Magnus Carlsen, he's really good at maneuvering. He doesn't mind exiting theoretical waters as quickly as possible, but I do like this choice right here, bishop to g5, because Black often is encouraged to push the g-pawn up 2 squares, and we saw it in some very important games in the Tata Steel Classical Tournament. It can get scary for Black if you have to extend your kingside pawns too far. Castling becomes more difficult.
Magnus instead drops his bishop back. Black has actually lost a move. This black bishop came out to c5 and then dropped back just a couple of moves later to e7. So that's the justification. As Robert says, it's always scary. You never want to touch a pawn, especially if you plan to castle kingside, especially if you only need a draw. So Magnus now, I've got to say as well, his trademark move, he never allows his opponent to gain space on the flanks. a4, he meets just every single time with a5. No matter kind of for better or worse, he will always block on the flanks. And Magnus, as if he's hearing me, smiles there. Sorry, Magnus, giving away your secrets. But yeah, this one, I'm expecting actually Wesley to do a few funky things. Maybe he'll drop his bishop back in the near future. Often White actually delays castling, delays what we would normally associate with the slower Italian games. There we go. He attacks the pawn. And yeah, it's just about whether he comes forward with his knight now. He comes to d2 instead. Maybe we'll see a bit of dancing by both players, a bit of maneuvering. But shaping up nicely. Again, calm before what's guaranteed to be a storm.
Gotta be a storm because Wesley So has got no option but to throw everything that he's got at Magnus Carlsen in this one. It starts slow. Right now, Wesley made the move pawn to c3, always eyeing the d4 central break to open things up at the right moment. Very often, Robert, in these positions, Black wants to try to trade off the light squared bishop. Is bishop e6 a move on Magnus's radar here?
It's on my radar. It's definitely on his radar. And then the question for Wesley is, do I trade right away? Do I allow Black to take me on c4 because I have a knight that can capture back? And the white bishop can also slide up the board to b5 just to put a little pressure on the pony on c6. So there are options available to white. The d3 to d4 push is clearly what the players will be looking for. But for white, you don't want to rush that decision because as soon as you push your d-pawn, your e4 pawn feels a little bit looser. So I would say the slight advantage for white is because of the quality of the minor pieces, in particular the bishop on e7. It's a passive piece, and the bishop on c4 for white already developed. The black knight's completely restricted, especially the knight on c6. So I would say that those are the small little pluses here, but it's not much. And Magnus, he's very solid, and he has a lot of experience from the black side of these setups.
And I want to mention, we saw a featured chat appear briefly saying only Wesley would play the Italian in a must-win situation, must-win game. And that might have been true 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But nowadays, all the top grandmasters play the Italian if they want to win, because this is one of the only openings you guarantee pretty much all the pieces on the board, past move 15, past move 20. So it's just about building that tension. It's psychological. You have so many options at your disposal. Magnus chooses to drop his knight back. Watch out for Magnus shuffling his king out the way and then unleashing the f-pawn potentially a bit later, since this bishop is a bit of a target. But yeah, the players, they're allowed to stamp their creativity. I used to play the Italian when I was a child. Used to get criticized for it by everyone, my coaches, fellow players. They were like, do you not understand chess? It's so boring. But little did they know it would become the most trendy opening pretty much worldwide at all levels. And I like to see Wesley kind of play in this mood. Delaying castling as we predicted, just bringing his knight to the center. Yeah, what do you make? Are you as excited as I am, Robert?
No, the answer is a definitive, resounding absolutely not. And I think because Wesley's in a must-win position, he is going to try to maneuver before castling, just create a little bit of confusion. But if we talk about stylistic play, I mean, if we can zoom out to our bird's eye view, because Wesley's not the only person who needs to win this game. Jan Nepomniachtchi needs to win, and we see second from the left. He is the black pieces. The engine, it will favor white in a position like that. Again, the second board from the left-hand side. But it's because Jan Nepomniachtchi can't have a dry position where we just trade pieces. He needs to keep things a bit ambiguous, not allow clear tension. So you see the difference of play when people's backs are against the wall and they have to win.
And judging from this bird eye view, what catches your eye first? I mean, we've talked about this game, Magnus Carlsen against Wesley. We'll check back in a bit later. Nepomniachtchi, wow, maybe we do have to jump there because he's really being provocative. He's really foregoing everything we're taught as youngsters. Robert, I think you called it. That might be the game of this, at least early stages. And let's go over to it. Question mark attached to this last move by Nepomniachtchi, but how does Josman punish it? He's actually up on the clock for once. This is a first today.
Game review is too objective. He needs to win with the black pieces. That is his objective. So it's a question mark move when you look at the evaluation bar, but it's the way to play for a win. In order to create chaos, you have to take huge risks. So Jan Nepomniachtchi, he's doing that. And for a change, he's the one who's down on the clock because he is spending time to make sure that his decisions are justified. And for Jose, he is playing solidly. So Tanya, I know as soon as I ask the question, you're going to say no way. But would you ever play this way from the black side when you need to win and a draw is the equivalent to a loss?
No way, Jose, is what I'm thinking right now. Because G5, for me, it's really exciting to see on the board as a commentator. But wait a second, the black king is not castled, haven't completed the development yet. And the G-pawn moving twice up the board, it's something that's really fun to watch, very brave, and I think you're absolutely on point that for Jan Nepomniachtchi, it's a move made out of the mat situation more than a move that he wants to make. But to me, it just looks like White's the one who's going to create the initiative. And Jose goes for it. With Black's king in the center, he's eyeing up, opening up off the E line. E takes D6 was a big threat. Nepomniachtchi immediately captures it. What are you going to recapture with? Because to me, David, all options are equally tempting. But I would say I want to pick it up with the D pawn right now. Or is G4 something that I need to be careful about?
Certainly, as you indicate there, Tanya, you need to hesitate, you need to calculate a little bit, but ultimately I think the most ambitious move is the best one. Taking with the pawn, let's show some moves. It does look like it walks into G4, and if you had to move this knight, suddenly your pawn in the center would drop. Valuation bar says, still pretty good for white, still good compensation, but at least your path to victory is far less clear. Luckily, you don't have to move pieces that are attacked. You can counterattack, and pawn to E6 would simply be devastating for black. It's a battering ram this pawn, hitting the knight, hitting this pawn, and if black has the temerity to take on f3, then I'm not even sure what you do next. But for example, just to highlight one checkmating pattern now, you give a check, kick the king back, and bishop to g6, you're going to make the kiss of death on f7 in the near future. This would be disastrous, but also the logical conclusion of this variation we're showing. If we go back to the game position, he's still hesitating. No, he has just taken this pawn, and pawn to e6 is a killer threat, a winning threat. If black tries to block, one final comment here, suddenly you open up a new hole for the white knight to jump into. This would be a check, a double attack, a fork, pretty much game over, at least at this level. So Nepomniachtchi living life on the edge. He needs to, and he's tried something a bit special here. He actually took on f3. Wow. Giving up the bishop pair, counterintuitive, but he's hoping that once the white knight takes, now he'll play e6, and there's nothing, no knight, no horsey pony that can jump into d6, yet at least. So still, I'm going to say ugly for black, but he's alive, and that's all Nepomniachtchi needs to do for now to keep his chances alive in this match.
Me, Robert, it looks like he's barely alive. He's given up such a strong bishop on b7, the light squared bishop. White's got the bishop pair. White's fully developed. That bishop from d3 can actually land on b5. I'm pinning your knight on d7. I want to go rook d1 next and win the game on the spot. g6, g5 was, they say brave and, well, super risky is two sides of the same coin. For me, g5 just turned out to be just a super risky.
You're correct. This G5 idea, it was clear what his intentions were. He needed to play for a win, so he decided to strike early, but his king is in the center. White's king is tucked away, and look at this, bishop b5. Black has to castle queenside. If you don't castle queenside, the game is just over, as white will pile up pressure on the pinned knight on d7 very quickly. So castling queenside, when you've already ridded yourself of the fianchetto light square bishop. Oof, too many holes to speak of. The white queen can jump into e4. The only thing, and I really mean the only thing that black has quote unquote going for him is that the e5 pawn is tender. And so if you can't defend that pawn adequately, maybe black steals it. But even if black were to win that pawn, I would still like white's chances because the black king will never, ever be safe. This looks bad. It is bad, but Jan had to do something.
I'm just surprised he hesitated so long before castling queenside. That was, as you say, Robert, the only move, the only way to justify what he'd previously done. And okay, Jospin there, Jose did look up, did shake his head. Maybe he just forgot that that was a legal move. It's easy to forget in chess, especially in such a weak flank, vulnerable squares all around, especially on the light squares. But now he does need to kind of deliver checkmate or somehow keep an attack going because, as you mentioned as well, this pawn is going to drop. If black gets one or two more moves, if black gets knight to e7, maybe knight to g6, and just takes this pawn, everything's possible. Anything's possible if white doesn't deliver checkmate. So yes, it's a bad position for black. Yes, we see the evaluation bar, but at least now he's kind of narrowed the path. He said, yes, the stakes are high. Checkmate me. If you do, you deserve to win this match and progress in the winner's bracket. If not, I'll win your pawn, and I'm back in it. So interesting strategy, mind games here from Nepomniachtchi.
And it's a really fascinating position, right? Because we're talking about white needing to find a way to actually win as quickly. But I was just about to point out that can white play a slow move like a4? Because there's this really fun line that can happen. If black was to go g4, e5 pawn is the big weakness in the position, and he doesn't. And David, I just wanted to highlight that it could be because of the move queen to e4. And I don't know if the tactics work out, but the eval bar doesn't move, so it seems like it does. And the point is, after f3, and I'm going to ask you to help me, do I give a check on a8, or do I go further with a sacrifice? Rook takes knight is so tempting, and I think it does work, because after rook d7, queen to a8, you give a check now, only move queen b8. I pick up the rook on d7, and this should be game over.
Should be game over. Of course, it never dies. It always continues. But yeah, the Black King now has to defend its queen. And here I'm assuming that there are going to be checkmating patterns. If you just move the bishop out of the way, you could probably even throw it away. And then with a check, bring the rook into the center. This looks over. So I love it, Tanya. And watch out for that type of thing to kind of consistently pop up, that type of pattern. Let's go back to the game. After knight to e7, a5, he's trying to just blow open the queen side. And I think he's keeping this trick up his sleeve. Like you said, he's trying to wait for the black pawn to go to g4, then queen e4 is pretty much a double attack. So a5, he's playing really energetically here, Jose, but he still needs to deliver the killer blow. And I think Nepomniachtchi, he's doing the right thing. He said A, he's castled queenside. Now he just has to take the material, take this pawn if he can, and just pray that there's no checkmate, no knockout blow. 4.5 minutes for Jose. Robert, do you think he's going to find something? How easy is it to find something here for white?
Not easy at all. I mean, you just said Jan said A, then he says BA. I will take your pawn. Thank you so much for it. And that also frees the B6 square up for a black knight if you need help defending. The knight on E7 may jump into the D5 square as well. So I actually believe that this position, it's hard to prove for white. As an audience member, as a spectator, as a commentator, you look, you say, the evaluation bar is really high up there. White's in charge. The king is safe on g1. That black king on c8, it looks like there's a lot of air in front of it. But the e5 pawn, that is a long-term weakness. It's overextended, and I don't see an easy way to defend it. So white needs to give up that pawn and go for an attack. But if you start rushing for your attack, let's say you play the move pawn to b4, just trying to really blast open that side of the board, you have to make sure that you will have the knockout. And actually, somehow that move is justified. The engine doesn't mind it. But I was trying to make the point that you can just really be one-dimensional, tunneled on the attack, and you may drop all of your other pawns in the center. But I guess b4 is real, and it's because the black king is unsafe. So I was just trying to give a throwaway move, and yet that's how good white's position is at the moment. But I still truly believe that it could go wrong if you're not careful.
And there we see, just below the board right now, actually Nepomniachtchi has played two moves that have been given a question mark, but it's because of the match situation. And yes, he's technically, objectively, made the position worse, but he's made it harder for Jose Martinez to navigate these choppy waters. And okay, one more move. A couple more moves have been played. Bishop takes. Suddenly, things are balancing out. A question mark from Jose, trading off pieces. And is this making his job easier in terms of guiding it towards safety, going for the draw? What is his plan here? He gives a check. And after the black knight blocks, some more quick moves by the players. This one's really calmed down. But black is still temporarily at least a pawn up. Another pawn will drop. I think Nepomniachtchi's surviving this game, but he needs to win. What do you think of these developments?
I think the only way to explain it is the math situation. For Jospam, a draw is what he needs to wrap it up, and he doesn't want to complicate things too much. But that said, he's giving Jan Nepomniachtchi the chances that he needs. I think Jospam had to keep the pressure going. Right now, the big question is he can't pick up the a5 pawn. The rook from a1 can slide on to d1. You give a check, but black's king can simply fall back to c8. It's one check. How are you continuing this initiative? How are you continuing the attack? The one idea I want to point out before I pass the ball to you, Robert, to break it down further is that white's queen can actually also think about infiltrating from the other side of the board. Always watch out from a future perspective, the queen landing on e4 or on c2 and actually going into the 8-7 square to start targeting the pawns on the queen's side. Still a lot to fight for white, but I feel he's made life a bit easier for Jan, Robert.
I love that point about the white queen. It looks well positioned, but it looks even better on a square like h7. White could actually strike this h6, g5 pawn chain with a move like h4 at some point. But what I really love the most is Jose's last move, knight to d2. He's losing contact with the e5 pawn, but he is trying to improve the location of his knight. That piece wasn't doing much of anything on f3. He's giving up a pawn because that a5 pawn, knight c4, knight takes a5, that looks available. And wow, I think that Jan had to take. He's trying to liquidate a little bit, because if that knight does leave c4 now, after the trade on a5, maybe b2 is loose, but you need to be really, really careful with this pin along the diagonal. Rook d1 check coming your way. White could win a piece if black's not careful, and I don't think there's enough material left for Jan to have realistic winning chances. So I think Jose is doing everything right.
I just want to point out one trick. You cannot take this knight. It's given a question mark, this move. It wasn't the best, but just if we go back one move, queen takes knight would have been a losing blunder, not because of queen takes queen, but because of a check. The queen jumps out the way with a check, and a discovered attack against the black queen, then the queen is lost next move. So Jan playing correctly, bishop to d6, blocking any checks against his king, and he lives to fight another day. But okay, he keeps the queens on now, Jospem, and still with great chances of potentially punishing Jan Nepomniachtchi for being greedy. Black living life on the edge, and wow, I was going to say let's zoom out, but suddenly a blunder attached to this last move. Wait, suddenly winning, the evaluation bar's gone sky high, but what is the knockout blow? Knight takes bishop, removing a defender. Perhaps the black queen is simply going to be kicked off balance right now. Actually, black's pieces fall like dominoes. Next move, the rook comes, no matter which piece you take with. And let's just show this. The queen is overworked. She has to defend her knight. She has to defend the pawn, but she's attacked. And if she gives way, for example, drops back to c7, then a simple capture, a check, and a knockout skewer to end. Winning. He's about to take this victory. Luckily, the white queen protects her rook as well, so no back rank checkmate tricks. Let's go back to the game position. Jospem is about to take this victory. We saw Jan Nepomniachtchi just smile again, shake his head. Nothing to do. This was a disastrous move.
Jan Nepomniachtchi knows that this is over. And we could see it on him. He's paused. He's frozen. Robert, it's like Jose has used the freezing spell on Jan right now with that last move. The c5 pawn is about to fall. Everything's falling apart. Moral of the story, do not keep your king in the center and play g6 to g5. It invited too much long-term trouble for Jan. And he knows that his road in the winner's bracket comes to a stop. It is double elimination, so there's still hope for Jan Nepomniachtchi.
Well, I thought you were going to say the moral of the story is that David's spell is better than mine, because I said tornado, and that's what Jan Nepomniachtchi did in this game. And then, as you said, Jocelyn uses freeze, and it seems like Jan Nepomniachtchi has made his move, no longer frozen, but rook d1 check, bishop takes c5 coming. It just seems like material will be won for the white side, and all he needs is a draw. So he doesn't need to win this game. If he can force a draw at any moment, he should do just that. So Jocelyn, you could see him. He was bopping his head. He's feeling the rhythm. He's winning this match. And this wins King of the Hill, but not usually chess games.
My favorite variant, Robert, where you win if you get your king to one of these 4 central squares quicker than the opponent. But yeah, normally in real chess, you get checkmated. And do not take this pawn right now. You will get mated on the spot. The white queen will recapture on f4, and the black king would be trapped. So you have to flee. You have to run. King to f5. But surely there's going to be a knockout blow in the near future, a check. Maybe we'll see your idea, Tanya, that you predicted miles in the future. You could check, come into h7, this black king get trapped within the next few moves. Surely, no way you survive out in the open like this.
He's just taken on g5, and once a black recaptures on g5, then all these ideas come into play. You could start with rook to f1. Eventually, the queen can come to e4 as well if black's king falls to g6. This king is not going to survive in the center of this hill at all. And Jan Nepomniachtchi, he's just thinking, does he even play on in this position? And if so, what is going to be his next move? Because it looks like it might be his last one.
The king is dying on that hill. It's not getting anywhere. It can retreat to g6 at some point, but c5 can fall. And I think the attack is very clear. So Jan Nepomniachtchi, he hasn't made his move. I think he understands that this match is his opponent's. And so he just maybe just prolonging the inevitable at this point, as it's going to be a match victory for Jose Martinez, the Peruvian star, proving once again that he can handle even the best players in the world in these short matches, not that many games. Don't count him out ever. He is really exceptional.
So good in these formats.
Just incredible play, right? Even in this game, he needed only a draw, but then he seizes the opportunity to go e5, blows open the queen side after the castle with a4, a5. A really nicely played attack, and now he's putting the finishing touches to the game. So black's king on e5 is actually just trapped there. It's got no squares. All you need is to deliver one check. Where is that check coming from? Do you just fall back with the bishop to f2 and going bishop g3? Goes queen f2. Another idea. And that's it. Jan Nepomniachtchi resigns. Jose Martinez is on a roll. He gets the job done in the winners' quarterfinals. He puts Jan Nepomniachtchi in the losers' bracket. What a day of chess it's been for him. What a match it's been, taking the first game and the final game, wrapping it up. He did not need to go into the Armageddon. Fantastic play, and he stays in the winners' bracket.
In the meantime, though, we do have other games ongoing. Let's jump over to see, okay, it just finished. The other man in the must-win situation was Wesley So, but ultimately wasn't successful. A draw just agreed by repetition. Magnus Carlsen progressing in that one. So Wesley tried 57 moves, but it wasn't enough. Magnus shutting the door on any potential comeback. So we have two players progressing, Lazavik against Vachier-Lagrave on the far left. We haven't covered much, but we will get to cover due to their Armageddon incoming. And that leaves Firouzja against Fedoseev. And we know all about those two fighters. Valuation bar on white side in the remaining game, but looks like a mess, looks complicated. A quick count shows, though, Robert, that white is a pawn up. How easy do you think this is to convert for Firouzja?
Not easy at all, and I couldn't even count the material. I thought for a second someone was an exchange up, but that's because there's a white rook on a6, like it's out in the wilderness, but it's also keeping black's pieces at bay. The g5 pawn, it sticks out. White's knights, they're both towards the rim, but they're putting immediate pressure on the c5 pawn, which cannot be captured right away because the rook on e1 is loose. So there are a lot of tactics, and handing black a pass pawn, that would seem scary to me, but it looks like Firouzja, he has everything under control. The engine agrees with his choice.
It looks like black is about to lose a pawn in this position, David. You fall back with the knight, white trades the rook, and you'll either end up losing the c6 pawns. Saying that, is knight c3 the idea behind this move? Is Fedoseev going to go in with that knight further on the board?
I think you called it, Tanya. You have to just be ambitious here. You cannot retreat. As soon as you start retreating, things will not go your way. You lose momentum. So jumping in with the knight, hoping to kind of recapture on c3 and create this monstrous pass pawn. I was going to say really nice simplification here by Firouzja, making the equation easier to work out, but suddenly knight c5, that was flashy. The white rook on e1 was undefended, so there was a trade, and he gets back with his knight. But is flashy necessarily good? This pawn will be blocked by white's knight on the d2 square. So black's big ace up his sleeve is the d pawn. Suddenly it's not so clear. The black rook might come in. Watch out for the white king. No defenders around it. And the evaluation bar's sliding. Wow, could we see a turnaround? White's 2 pawns up, but black's pieces are so active.
Yeah, I think you could push this pawn to d3 to force the white knight back, and now rook e8, because rook e2 is a tempo shot. Oh, rook b8, similar idea, but the engine doesn't seem to love it, so it's given a question mark. Maybe it's because the knight drops back, it's blocking the file and protecting the other knight. Now it's a tempo too slow. So I think, David, that was a missed opportunity from Fedoseev, and now look at Firouzja. He has everything under control.
Through, he's going to win this g-pawn, and from the g5 square, white's rook does a sterling job of defending its own pawn on g2. Now white is 3 whole pawns to the good, and this pawn is held under lock and key. Black's d-pawn so close to touchdown, but not close enough. The white knights do a great job of defending each other and blockading. Knights are the best blockaders, and now it's loose as well. It's all gone wrong for Fedoseev. After we joined it, he had such good compensation. Firouzja, though, fantastic technique, and it feels like he's just putting the finishing touches on now. The white pawns will start marching. As long as you don't get checkmated, you're winning this game. Pawn to c5, 7 seconds against 22. How big a factor do we think is the clock?
That's his only hope. For Fedoseev, he has to try to keep the pressure on, try to find tricks with the knight and the rook combined. Alireza Firouzja marches up with his own king, delivering a check. The c-pawn can move forward now, also defending the rook. He falls back, allowing a pawn capture on g2 coming in with the check. So some counterplay going on here. The rook can go to e5 now. there are all kinds of checks happening on the board. This might not be over yet.
And no, look at the evaluation bar. It's now even because that white king, it's hiding behind enemy lines. It might get checkmated behind enemy lines. So watch out for knight e6 check, knight h5 check. I think right now you can continue maneuvering this knight around, but white is 2 pawns ahead. So if there is no checkmate, you need to be careful. So I guess Fedoseev just stealing pawns in the process. David, do you actually think that black could be the side for choice?
Definitely. And look how focused Fedoseev is right now. He senses an opportunity. The white king just marched too far in. Again, king of the hill. Active kings, you've got to be really careful about. And suddenly, black's promoting this pawn. Black is pushing. You have to be really careful. White's going for checkmate suddenly. Who's winning this race? It's a pure race. White, can he give a petrol check? If not, black promotes and wins. Rook to d7's a blunder. Black deflects the rook and wins. A new queen's going to appear.
Oh my gosh.
What a find by Fedoseev. And he wins. The game is over. Fedoseev takes it. What a defensive find by him.
What a miss by Alireza Firouzja. Rook to f7, the big resource, the big move by the big fish. And that gets him back in the match as he wins his 4th game. Leveling the score. Alireza Firouzja so close. This is a heartbreaking moment for Alireza. And he's got to fight it out now in the Armageddon.
Alireza Firouzja actually goes down to the loser's bracket. What a game that was. Just letting it slip from the brink of victory there. 3 pawns to the good. Fedoseev, what a comeback. And we also see the other results there, Tanya. So many twists and turns in this first day of quarterfinals.
Yeah,
You're
saw
right, Robert. Sorry, Robert, just wanted to correct myself that Alireza Firouzja actually from winning the match now loses and goes down to the loser's bracket as you pointed out, but we do have one Armageddon coming up.
We do. Just Denis Lazavik against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. 4 draws. That was a very even match. The other ones, topsy-turvy. Magnus had things under control after his win, but between Fedoseev and Firouzja, it seemed like that match could have gone anyone's way, but the last mistake is the critical one, and Alireza Firouzja, he goes down to the losers bracket. Fedoseev remains in the winners, as does Jose Martinez, maybe the most impressive performer in the quarterfinals.
And I just wanted to highlight that moment and do a bit of a deep dive into where it all went wrong for Alireza Firouzja. He'd already let the advantage slip. He had a 3-pawn advantage, but now the white king simply getting chased to its doom. We saw the white king now step even further into the enemy camp. He should have run to safety, supporting his own pawns, run to the queen's side. That was the only way to keep this game under control. Instead, he marched forward, and a few moves later, we already saw white find the only move to avoid checkmate. Knight e6 is a checkmating pattern. The white king would have been doomed here, but if we fast forward the next few moves, we saw a few twists and turns, a few checks here and there, but it was now, once the blockader of this black d-pawn disappeared, that Firouzja lost even more control. He went for a counterattack against the black king, but ultimately missing in this position the only way to draw. It was difficult. He could have given a knight check, and if black wants to win, then king to a7 the only move, and here you can give a few checks, but more importantly, you can play rook to d7, x-ray vision defending this square. If black makes a new queen, you check, and you win this queen next. If, however, instead, black tries this same trick, rook to f7, deflection, as we soon see in the game, then the white knight is within touching distance of guarding this square. Actually, maybe first, a bit of a finesse here. Maybe you need to actually just move the white king out the way. The rook's still protected. Instead, he missed this. Very difficult under time pressure, under duress. Rook to d7 instead, and beautiful. Double exclamation mark. Deflection simply. The white rook disappears. No guardian, no bodyguard of the black d-pawn anymore. Black makes a new queen, and Fedoseev won the quarterfinal.
Wow. So sharp by Fedoseev right there. And Alireza Firouzja, he took the lead in the match, but it's Fedoseev who advances in the winner's bracket. We've got a big Armageddon coming up between Maxime Vachier-Lagrave and Denis Lazavik as the players fight to get to the top of the Chessable Masters. But don't go anywhere in the break, because during the break, for all of you, we've got a special video coming up with Krzysztof Sielecki's impressive rise to the top. Don't go anywhere.
I used to work at the bank from 7 to 6. I was a stock market analyst. I always had an interest in this, working under time pressure. And at that time, I had a friend. It was Christoph Sielecki, who was also working at the bank. During our lunch times, we often walked through the park and played chess as well. I thought one time, well, Christoph, you're so good in explaining all this stuff. Why don't you just record it? You know, make a video or something, and maybe other people can listen to it as well.
Yeah, and it all started from there. At the time, I found YouTube, which was pretty new in 2011. And I uploaded my first video on my Chess Explained channel. And it was funny because I sent Michael the video links so that he could watch and give me feedback. But all of a sudden, dozens of people watched. Later on, when the channel was larger, I got plenty of people contacting me about lessons, and then I started teaching. Yeah, so the channel was really kind of the beginning of thinking about chess as a career. And I quickly had a full schedule, like basically teaching 30 hours a week. Chess is such a beautiful and kind of multifaceted game. You find something new every day. In chess openings in particular, which is my forte, I'm thrilled to find new ideas, present them to the audience, and help them to play a better and entertaining chess.
Totally fascinating if you talk with Christoph about chess in general, but also especially openings. He's like a machine, a fountain of knowledge.
I was always fascinated by the opening phase of the game because I think due to this fixed starting position, you have something it's very explorable. You have a very constant thing that you can look at. Yeah, I think my total highlight of my career with chess and with Chessable, that happened in 2020 when pretty much out of the blue I got this offer to work together with Peter Heine Nielsen, Magnus Carlsen's chief trainer and second, to write a course about Magnus called the Magnus Touch, about Magnus' great ability in end games, in middle games, planning like all his best games and ideas. And I wrote that together with Peter Heine. It was a great experience. We were on plenty of Zoom calls. That was in the height of the pandemic. It's pretty wild. At the end, Magnus recorded the whole thing based on my script, which was fascinating. A real great experience to get in touch with like the highest level of chess, which was completely unimaginable before. I never thought that something like that could happen. Yeah, it's just a wild journey in a way. Uploading a video in July 2011, and from going there to cooperation with Camp Magnus, and then finally last year in 2022 I won this Author of the Year for Chessable after having successful courses in the past couple of years. It was just like impossible to imagine when I just started doing like a single video for my friend basically, and then at the end this whole thing transpired. It's really unbelievable.
Welcome to the most exciting format in chess, Armageddon. The ultimate tiebreaker. Armageddon grants white more time on the clock, but in return, white must win. A draw secures black the match win. White starts with 10 minutes, and each player submits a confidential bid with an amount of time they are willing to start with. Lowest bid gets to choose their color, usually black, and those coveted draw odds. Let the Armageddon commence.
It's the most destructive format in chess and is aptly called the Armageddon, and the bids are in by the players. And look at that, Denis Lazavik outbids, outsmarts Maxime Vachier-Lagrave by 3 seconds. Denis Lazavik wins the Armageddon bid 6 minutes to 40 seconds. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave bid 6 minutes to 43 seconds. David, what do you make of this bid? Has Denis Lazavik managed to get into Maxime's head?
Does certainly look that way. First off, we should mention it's a different format. Last season they had 15 minutes base time. This year it's going to be even faster, but it definitely feels like Denis, full of confidence, having avoided defeat in regular time today. Those 4 games, he was never really in trouble. He's backing himself here to draw with black. Who cares if it's a few extra minutes for the opponent? And I love that attitude. As you say, Tanya, it feels like pressure's definitely on Vachier-Lagrave now, needing to win with white, needing to find something a bit different from the games earlier today.
And Robert, it's a similar storyline to the Champions CCT Finals in Toronto, in the round-robin stages, where Denis Lazavik, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave playing against each other, 2 draws, and finally Denis took the win in the Armageddon. There, he had the white pieces. Is this something that's going on in the players' minds right now? What happened just 2 months ago?
It must play in their minds, because Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, that was a disappointing result for him in an underwhelming performance. So for Maxime, he wants to get the job done here. But Denis, he has shown that why should he lose any game, even against these super grandmasters? He beat Hikaru 2-0. He then took down Anish Giri. Now he's going toe-to-toe every bit Maxime Vachier-Lagrave's equal in this specific match. So there is limited time on his clock, but he's shown that his moves, they're great, and even under the duress of time trouble, he has proven in his bullet chess prowess that he can handle it.
And this is the first time we've got the base time as 10 minutes in the Champions CCT. What do you think about those dynamics? Starting with 6 minutes and 40 seconds, has Denis Lazavik, is this bit too low? The games are off. What do you think about 6 minutes, 40 seconds before we get into the opening?
We're going to find out, Tanya. This is one of the first times this season we've seen this type of dynamic. And 6 minutes, it might not sound like much, but the top players, they play bullet games all the time. Denis Lazavik's so experienced. And look at this central mess. All the tension there. Temporarily, all the knights were staring off at each other in the middle of the board. Suddenly they all disappear in the blink of an eye. And still a 3.5 minute time advantage for Vachier-Lagrave. So this is a branch of the English opening. Earlier in their clashes in regular time, we saw the Spanish, the Berlin, lots of really cagey, slow, stodgy stuff. Now, Vachier-Lagrave going direct, this central strategy, and he's got to hope that he catches Lazavik off guard. Robert, who are you favouring? It's early days, but who do you think is going to be happy with the outcome of the opening?
Well, the evaluation bar, the engine to the left-hand side of the board, is happy with Black's play, but I think that Maxime, he should also be happy, because this isn't a symmetrical pawn structure. White has 2 central pawns, the D and the E pawns. Black has only 1, and I do love Denis's last move, Queen F6. He does not want to give White the entire center. If there is a trade on D4, then it's 2 versus 0 in the center, but Black has an extra 2 pawns on the queen side. So this is what we're going to be talking about. That's the dynamics of this position, is that the pawn structure is not the same for each side, so they're playing for different ideas.
And before the game started, we were talking about the matchup in Toronto, which was a while back, but perhaps Maxime is also thinking about what happened yesterday. Denis Lazavik took down Anish Giri in an Armageddon in a very convincing manner, gave no chances at all. And I think if my memory serves me right, Denis was black in that game. It ended in a draw, and Denis took the match. He made it look easy, and right now, I do like the fact that the pieces, the minor pieces, it's all symmetrical right now. Yes, the pawn structure, it does provide some play for Maxime, but to me, it looks like it's not going to be enough. It's just a position that's easy to play. And with Black, you just need a draw to win the Armageddon.
And as you can see that experience, you can tell that he's played a bunch of Armageddons, just the way he's handling it. He's still spent less than 1 minute on the clock to get this far into the game. We're at move 20 now. Bishops disappear as well. He's getting closer to safety. And okay, he makes this controversial decision, though, that Robert highlighted earlier. He's allowing Vachier-Lagrave to just take this pawn off the board, and I think correctly taking with the pawn towards the center. Yes, black's pieces are active, the queen, the rook on the open file. The white bishop is a bit stuck on the e3 square, but ultimately now, even if the queens disappear, rooks disappear, bishops off the board, there is this imbalance long term. So I like what Denis is doing, especially this last move, throwing pawns down the board now. Super quick play, but Vachier-Lagrave, he's got to be banking on his chances long term. And yeah, as long as he keeps that 2.5 minute, 2 minute time advantage, I think it might come down to a scramble. As you said, Tanya, a draw is enough for Denis, but still a while to go before that. Queen's coming off the board as well. Wow, surprising decision, Robert.
I love the way that both of these two are playing, because queen b5 had a hidden threat that if the black queen didn't escape, there was a bishop g5 with a skewer. So now the queens are off the board. That should make it easier for white to push the pawns. If this e2 pawn were on e4, then we'd start feeling a little bit more confident about white's chances. But look at Denis. His last move, rook to e7, it's clear. He wants to double rooks and prevent white from pushing forward in the center. But now he's also pressing forward himself on the king side. These are players who are playing on both sides of the board. They're not just tunneled in the center. I think that black is stable. The question now becomes, can white make any inroads? Tanya, do you see anything here that would lead you to believe that white can, in fact, make progress?
I don't know about white's progress, but the last few moves by Denis, Robert, to me, it seems he's the one who's looking for progress. He's expanded on the king side. He wants to make the move h5 to h4 next. Try and open up the h line, looking for chances of the rook infiltrating with rook h1, maybe trading off more pieces on the board. In general, when it's the Armageddon, when you're fighting for a draw, when you're low on the clock, with black having managed to trade off so many pieces, I think so far it's been success for Denis Lazavik.
Been a Laza victory this last few moves, at least in terms of the psychological battle. Black's king as well has a clear path towards the center, just blocked off. And wow, Denis creating threats along the back rank, but watch out for white's threat. White is now threatening in the near future to take this pawn on b6 and undermine the black bishop on d6, hence why it's protected. And yeah, I was thinking about what pieces need to disappear. I think white wouldn't mind the bishops disappearing, being traded off, and black would love the rooks to disappear because then the b pawn will run. So still very, very tense, both sides with a lot to play for. But I'm looking at the clock, it's still 5 minutes. Denis is so speedy, just another level, so quick here. He's making Armageddon look like a classical game. He's just enjoying this moment.
And he's playing against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, the 2021 Bull Bliss champion, one of the biggest speed chess specialists of modern chess. And he just keeps the game going and the clock under control. I have to ask Robert a question here. Is f5 ever a move you want to make in these positions to try to get rid of as many pawns on the board?
It absolutely is a move that will be justified and is a good decision from a practical standpoint. Does it create some risk? I think the answer is also yes. So f5, I love it. I think the engine will approve. But for Denis Lazavik, does he need to do anything? Unlike spell chess, he can just sit here and just kind of hang out, right? You know, he doesn't have to use freeze. He doesn't have to do anything special. But he actually did just move his bishop in the center. And that move, it changed the evaluation a little bit, but black is no worse. All he needs is a draw. He's piling up on the d5 pawn. Actually, what can you do as white? Isn't that pawn just dropping?
This might spell the end. Talking of spells, it might spell the end for Vachier-Lagrave in the winner's bracket. He's trying to desperately trade off bishops now. But Denis, I think you're sport for choice. Just get rid of this bishop. Take this pawn off the board. If you want to be flashy, you could have taken the pawn as well. That would have led to some tactics. Now, all he needs to do, just trade off one set of rooks. Even if black's 2 queenside pawns disappear, with the absence of both sets of rooks, if it's just one set left, easy draw. And why actually worry about that when you can go for the counterattack? Black's a whole pawn up, and he's going to put his rook on f7, defend everything. I think Vachier-Lagrave is the one fighting for the draw here. He's having to take risks, and look at the march of these two connected passes. These 2 pawns together will win the game for Lazavik now, or at least will get him the desired result.
Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. is down a pawn. He's just got a 1 minute lead on the clock. Flagging is nowhere in the cards right now. Denis Lazavik in driver's seat. He made it look easy against Anish Giri. He's making it look easy against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. How does the kid do it, Robert?
He's a fantastic player. He's just extremely underrated. And the top players, they don't take him lightly. We just saw him beat Hikaru and Anish, and he is not losing this game to Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. All Denis needs is a draw. He may, in fact, win this game as Maxime has to go all out. This question mark, I don't care about it. I think we can all agree to disagree with the game review saying that, yeah, maybe it's not the objective best move, but all Black needs is a draw. So to answer your question, Tanya, is that Denis is underrated. He's a great bullet player. He's an exceptional speed chess player, and he can do it in rapid, even in the World Rapid Championships. He's shown that. So credit to him. He is just an amazing, amazing player at just 17.
So impressive.
I wanted to say, he has a superpower and he knows how to use it. He has a low rating, and this is for everyone out there at home. If you're playing someone higher rated, you can just play solid. You can bully them and use it against them, and there we see resignation. Denis wins it and gets past Maxime Vachier-Lagrave.
17-year-old Denis Lazavik, he gets the job done in the Armageddon against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, takes the dub, stays in the winner's bracket, goes through to the winner's semi-final. He relegated Hikaru Nakamura, he relegated Anish Giri, and now he puts Maxime Vachier-Lagrave in the loser's bracket. Incredible chess by Denis. He really is a menace to the top guys.
He is indeed. That's why we call him. It is a loving nickname for him, but he is a menace, and he will be for years to come, because Denis Lazavik, he continues to prove why he made it through to the Champions Chess Tour Finals just 2 months ago now in Toronto. It's just he can hang with the best players. He doesn't win that many games, let's be clear, but he can hang, he can draw, and when all you need is a draw with the black pieces against a Super Grandmaster, he can do it, and he just did.
That was absolute class by Denis. And David, it just felt like Maxime never got a chance. What was the highlight for you in this impressive Armageddon?
Simply, Denis was in control from move one. I wanted to highlight one moment where the maturity of Denis Lazavik's play really shone through. And this is our game review. We'll see some exclamation marks, we'll see some question marks, but remember, Denis doesn't have to play the best moves, he just has to play the safest moves, with a draw being sufficient. So rook to d7 here, attacking White's central pawn. And after this tricky move, bishop to d4, Denis did not get hasty. He did not get tempted to take this pawn, allowing some complications. Here, no doubt Vachier-Lagrave would have actually given up material, sacrificed the exchange, but suddenly Black loses control. Suddenly, yes, it's bishop for rook, should favor Black, but White has 3 connected pawns here, and actually White would have chances long term. This pawn would drop in the near future, the Black king not entirely safe, and suddenly White would open things up to having 3 possible results. So instead, let's go back and see what he did. He actually just traded off the bishops first, removing all risk. And yes, this comes at the cost of a potential extra pawn, but if White had taken this rook off the board, we would have seen an easily drawable endgame. Denis Lazavik, again, not to be underestimated. He knows exactly how the endgames work, he knows what to aim for, and ultimately, he's a hard man to beat, and that got him through this match.
We've been talking about Denis's style. One of his biggest strengths has been his endgame play. We saw it against Anish. We saw it today against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. We're going to go into a short break, but don't go anywhere, as we're going to be joined by Denis, who just took down Maxime in this thrilling battle. We'll be back with the winner of that match in just a few.
Hello, Vanakkam.
Vanakkam. So this is where the magic happens, and this is where all the magic has already happened.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. That's my World Junior.
87.
87. It's difficult to tell you how many doors that opened for me and what historical moment it was, and when I got back. The Chess Oscars, very nice. These 5 of them.
5 of them.
The Wanderers.
5 and there's one on top that is the 6th one. So since he had already got 5, they didn't want to give him the same trophy. So they gave him a trophy of a king with the world in his hand. Yeah. This is Anand's first ever mention in a newspaper.
Oh.
So this is his first ever he was mentioned.
V. Anand achieved a national record by winning all the 9 rounds to notch a maximum of 9 points in the Sub-Junior Championship.
But imagine now T.S. Ravi's daughter Rakshita is part of the Westbridge Anand Chess Academy. I mean, it's so beautiful to see how life comes around.
So World Rapid Chess and Mind Champion. So this was NIT gave me this nice trophy.
Why do I get the feeling that Aruna knows all the trophies and where you won better than you remember it, Anand?
Because I cleaned and read.
Because it's true.
Whatever, did you have a favorite? Thank you so much, Anand. I feel this is extra motivation for all the youngsters, this opportunity to actually come here and witness these achievements and spend time with you in this stunning room. Anand, Aruna, thank you so much for this.
Which one's you?
The pawn? I like the pawn. The knight. The knight can jump over pieces. Oh, you want me to say the queen? The queen's the strongest piece on the board.
This one's you.
King? The king sucks. He can only move 1 square.
You've got to reassess your chess.
Grandmaster Maurice Ashley presents Jeremy Silman's How to Reassess Your Chess, now on Chessable. So go to chessable.com/yourchess and start reassessing your chess today.
Welcome back, everyone. We are being joined by the boy of the moment, I should say right now, Denis Lazavik, after his big win against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, taking the match in the Armageddon. Firstly, a big congratulations, Denis, on that match. It's been awesome to watch you in the tour last year. It was awesome to watch you in the World Rapid and Blitz as well. And now it's been awesome to watch you these last 2 days, Denis. You've taken down Anish Giri, Hikaru Nakamura, and today Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. How are you feeling right now? And which one of these three has been the most special win for you?
Yeah, yes, of course, I feel great. Of course, I mean, every win was really special for me because it's really hard to beat, any top players. But yeah, after my win against Hikaru, I got some additional strength. Probably my confidence is improved a little bit, and then it was a little bit easy for me to play, I think.
And Denis, you said during the Champions Chess Tour Finals in Toronto that you felt it was easier for you to play online. But right after that event, you went to the World Rapid and the World Blitz, and once again had a tremendous performance. So, how do you keep doing it? Do you just think you prefer quicker time controls to classical chess? What's your favorite time control to play?
Actually, I think my favorite control is Rapid, I guess, because I think I a little bit better play in Rapid, but yeah, for in over the board chess, in World Rapid and Blitz, I played better in Blitz, and online I played better in Rapid, I think, because when I played Title Tuesday, sometimes I played not so great, but now in Rapid I think I played quite good.
And Denis, after today's victory, you progress to the winners' semi-final, and tomorrow it looks like you'll play against Jose Martinez, another informed player. What do you predict for that one? How do you feel about your chances in that match?
I think it will be more or less equal match. I didn't play against him a lot. We played probably one rapid games and some bullet match, which he won. But I mean, it's of course completely different. Yeah, I think it more or less equal match.
Denis, we're really looking forward to the fight in the winners semi-finals. And you mentioned that winning against Hikaru gave you a lot of confidence going ahead. And we've got an interesting chat question around that. It's by Yas Senpai. And he wants to know that when you're playing against such experienced opponents, how do you manage to stay so calm?
I already have some experience also, so all this event last year it helped me. So I mean I just try to focus somehow. Online I already played quite a lot against top players, so I mean I just somehow I do it. I cannot explain it, but yeah, I'm a professional chess player, so I should do it somehow.
Dennis, it's funny. I think that makes perfect sense. Sometimes we can't explain why things happen, but your pieces do all the talking. And we do have another chat question from Indiana Rahul, and they ask, Dennis, how did you choose your Armageddon time? Because you were so precise. You did win the Armageddon by just 3 seconds. So how did you decide on the time that you bid?
When I played against Anish, I mean, there is a tournament in Stavanger where they play in Armageddon also, and the time is like 7 and 10, I think, and so it feels quite natural to beat 7 minutes. So I think he probably wanted to play with black, and he probably thought that I will beat like 7 minutes. That's why I beat 650. And now when I played against MVL, I thought also he wanted to play with black, and he will choose less than 650. So I decided to choose 6 and 40. Because also I wanted to play with black.
And Dennis, you're quickly becoming one of my chess idols, but we have a question from the chat from Jeremy Q. Who is your chess idol? Who's your hero in chess?
I mean, I don't have any. I mean, I like to watch some games of some top players in past and now, but yeah, I don't have any idol or something.
Well, Dennis, you may not have an idol in chess, but I see you probably have a good friend beside you. Is your cat over there, your little Koshka? Is your cat over there?
My cat is sleeping in other room, so.
Well, Dennis, you said you don't have any idols or heroes, but you're definitely taking them down one by one in these events. And before I let you go, I have to ask you, all these medals behind you, so many of them, Dennis, and I'm assuming that it's all from chess tournaments. I can't count from here, but it's a lot. Any special medal amongst those behind you?
I cannot choose any medal. So it's like my history. So every medal is important for me, of course.
That is a very deep answer, Dennis. But also, just like your chess, very deep. Thank you so much and congratulations. Thanks for giving us your time. And tomorrow you've got a big one coming up against Jose Martinez in the winner semifinals. We wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
See you, Dennis.
17-year-old Denis Lazavik with a bit of history behind him with all those medals. He's just starting to make his legacy in the chess world. Well, it's been quite a performance for him in the last 2 days, taking down 3 of the world's best players. But the action continues as we see on our bracket here in the winner semi-final. Denis will take on Jose Martinez. Magnus Carlsen will take on Vladimir Fedoseev. Robert, 2 big matchups coming up in the semi-finals. What's your take on this action?
Well, we also have matches going on in the losers bracket, but you asked me what happens up top, so I'll keep my head up high, and I think that between Magnus Carlsen and Vladimir Fedoseev, we'll have players swinging at one another, and then of course between Denis Lazavik and Jose Martinez, we have a bit of a stylistic clash, but they both are quite solid in nature, and they love to get down to their waning seconds. So in the winners bracket, it will be interesting chess for sure. In the losers bracket, it's a fight to survival. So David, I don't know which match is your favorite because all of these feature some excellent very fan-favorite players.
Now we're really spoiled for choice in the losers bracket where the stakes are higher than ever. They cannot afford any more match defeats. I'm going to say Nepomniachtchi, Vachier-Lagrave is going to be fire on the board. Nepomniachtchi, we saw it today, not quite clicking into gear, but I have a feeling tomorrow he'll be desperate to make amends. So a lot to look forward to.
I'm really excited about that one as well, David. Both players disappointed with day one here in Division 1. We're going to see an angry Jan and an angry Maxime Vachier-Lagrave both on their last lives. Of course, there are big matchups all around in the winners bracket as well. It's been awesome. It's been amazing covering Division 1 with both of you once again. And of course, chat, we will be back with day 2 with the winners semi-finals as well as the losers bracket, as 2 players will be knocked out of Division 1 tomorrow. It's a goodbye from the 3 of us. We'll see you tomorrow.